2002, Joyce Soa was the perfect example of an independent woman who had successfully climbed the career ladder in the nation's capital.
I had worked with the Secret Service, then I moved to Treasury, and I became the chief of staff to 3 different political appointees there. I had the most rewarding career in the government. I was making very good money.
The vivacious 53-year-old had never been married, instead choosing to dedicate her life to her career. That summer, Joyce was set to retire by the end of the year and was looking forward to enjoying the fruits of her labor.
I was living in a townhouse in Alexandria, and I wanted to move. I was really looking for an investment property.
As Joyce cruised through her neighborhood one day that August, she noticed a real estate sign for new homes being built nearby.
I found the name of the agent and left a message, called me back, and we talked for a bit.
Hey, I just got your message that you're interested in one of the houses.
He sounded so cute, and it was just an immediate connection that I felt with him.
His name was Bryant Parker, and as they set up a meeting, Joyce couldn't help but feel some undeniable magnetism at play.
He said he would come over and show me the houses. I was really excited about meeting him.
When Bryant arrived, Joyce was pleased to see his face matched his voice.
My pleasure.
I opened the door and I thought, oh gosh, he's gorgeous.
Are you ready to go look at your new house? Let's go do it.
I am.
I'll tell you what. I'll drive.
When Joyce mentioned that she was interested in purchasing a country home as well, Bryant told her he'd be happy to help with her search.
I wanted to buy a house in Middleburg because I was always into the horse scene and I'd go to the races. And it was like a 40-minute drive from my townhouse.
I'm going to find you that perfect place.
From there, the pair spoke daily about real estate. And it wasn't long before those chats morphed into marathon conversations about their lives.
You're reading my mind.
She was very interested in him. He had outgoing personality, you know, he was in sales, and they just seemed to go together so well.
So one night, Joyce took a chance and invited Bryant over for dinner.
And we had a bottle of wine. We just sat there and had a blast.
Although, Joyce was disappointed to learn that Bryant was only recently separated from his wife of 16 years, with whom he had a 12-year-old son.
He didn't want to separate from his wife because they had a son. His soon-to-be ex-wife was moving up to Pennsylvania.
Hate that he's that far away, you know?
I didn't want to date somebody that was just separated because it takes a while to go through it. And so I was really leery about that.
But Joyce remained encouraged by the fact that Bryant seemed to want to see her more frequently.
He was coming over for dinner once a week. I could just feel the heat from his body. I was just really attracted to him.
Joyce was especially overjoyed when one night after dinner, Bryant finally made a move.
It was just like night and day between kissing anybody else.
From that moment on, all uncertainty vanished. And in the fall of 2002, when Bryant helped Joyce close on her beloved country home, the two were inseparable.
Bryant seemed like a pretty nice guy. And Joyce seemed to be happy. And I respected him because he was with Joyce.
The physical, the emotional, the spiritual, just everything was there.
Well, she knew what she wanted.
I thought, I am falling in love with him.
But Joyce had no idea that she'd given her heart to a ticking time bomb, and her future with Bryant would explode in a horrific conclusion she never saw coming.
I was in total shock. I could not believe it.
I thought, who does that?
The blood just started pouring, and the look on his face was horrid.
In the fall of 2002, Joyce Soa was excited to start sharing her life with Bryant Parker.
We just had so much fun. I wasn't sure if I wanted to get married to him, but I knew that we would somehow be together.
Still, Joyce couldn't help but notice that his relationship with his soon-to-be ex-wife was becoming problematic.
No, don't tell me to calm down. I'm not mad.
They would get in these violent arguments over the phone.
No, it's not okay. That's my son. What the hell is wrong with you?
He was going through a very rough separation.
I know, it's not easy.
I was being very understanding. I told him you need to work things out with her so that you have a mutual understanding about seeing your son. And things calmed down a lot.
When Christmas rolled around, Joyce vowed to get into the holiday spirit until Bryant dropped a bombshell.
Hey.
I'd scheduled a Christmas party, and he tells me he can't make it.
Hey,
And I said, what do you mean?
It's our first Christmas together.
my ex wants me to spend some time with my son. So I'm gonna go see him.
Joyce was uncomfortable with Bryant staying at his ex's, but didn't want to deny him the chance to see his son.
I understand. You should go.
This is the typical thing that people go through when they're going through a separation.
But when Bryant decided to go back to his ex's on Valentine's Day, Joyce couldn't help but wonder if something more was going on.
Just go.
I had called a dear friend of mine, and I said, Bryant went to where his ex-wife was living on Valentine's Day. I said, do you think he had sex with her?
Yes, absolutely.
And I was like, oh my God.
2 days later, Bryant returned.
Ryan, did you sleep with your ex?
And I looked him in the eye. And he said yes. I was just totally devastated. I didn't say anything. I picked up my purse and I went into work. He tried to call me on my cell phone, which I wouldn't answer.
That night, Joyce stayed at her townhouse in Alexandria. She refused to take the dozens of calls from Bryant explaining the alleged encounter.
I know that I messed up bad.
But she knew she couldn't ignore him forever.
He said I need to explain what happened.
I fell for it. I'm so sorry.
I know they had the son together, but he was dating Joyce. I mean, he shouldn't have been doing that. That was wrong.
It'll never happen again.
He said it was over with her. He said I told her I was coming back to you for good.
To prove it, Bryant told Joyce he wanted to get married after his divorce was finalized in 2 months.
I love you, Joyce. I want to spend the rest of my life with you.
Perhaps against her better judgment, Joyce found herself relenting.
He had a good job and we just had so much fun. I knew he was the one. And so at that point, we decided to get married.
When I found out she was getting married, I thought it was going very fast, but she was ready, and Joyce has always known what she wants.
The couple decided to tie the knot that April, once Bryant was officially divorced and Joyce was due to retire from the government. But the day before their wedding, Bryant came home with some bad news.
They fired.
Bryant was working through a real estate company that worked with the builder. And he got in an argument with the builder.
We had a difference of opinion about money.
Joyce decided to look at the positive side. Maybe it was all a blessing in disguise.
I had my retired pay and I had gone to a consulting firm where I was making actually very good money. So what we decided is to let him set up a real estate office.
I think it's a fabulous idea.
The next day, after 9 months together, the two exchanged vows in a small private ceremony.
Oh, I was thrilled. We had decided to get married in the house. And when you opened up the front window, it had a view of this farm. And it was just gorgeous.
That July, the newlyweds celebrated their union with a lavish trip to London, and Joyce was more than happy to cover the cost. But as soon as they returned, it seemed the honeymoon was definitely over when Joyce saw an entirely different side to her husband.
I didn't know that he was capable of something like that.
He was completely crazy.
You're so stupid.
He was like Jekyll and Hyde.
In the summer of 2004, Joyce Soa was happy to help her new husband, Bryant Parker, start his own real estate company after he was fired from his job.
I paid the rent. I bought him the computer. I spent $25,000 setting up the office.
But despite her help, it seemed as if a switch had flipped in Brian's personality, starting with his work ethic.
He never sold one house, never sold a piece of property. He wasn't making any money. We started arguing.
They keep mounting up.
Because, well, I was paying for everything. I wasn't making enough money to keep up with the bills. I was horrified. I thought, now what are we going to do?
Joyce was starting to seriously worry about her husband, especially after 2 years, when Bryant's real estate business flopped entirely.
Bryant was really drinking a lot. He got depressed. His self-worth had gone down. I could tell that he wasn't happy.
Joyce struggled to support Bryant over the next few years as he bounced from one job to the next. But his excessive drinking was beginning to take its toll.
He was verbally abusive with me. He would call me names.
You're such a cow. You're so stupid.
He would yell at me and scream, and, he apologized, but then the drinking continued.
Desperate to set her husband straight, on December 1st, 2009, Joyce told Bryant that she wanted a separation.
I said,
I'm giving you a year.
clean up your act, quit drinking, find a good job. I said, you gotta just take care of yourself and do what you need to do.
Fine, Joyce.
Bryant moved out of the house and in with family members.
I was happy that she had kicked him out, but she looked frail, lost a lot of weight. I was very concerned.
But by the following year, it was clear their separation was not having the effect on Bryant that Joyce had hoped.
He was drinking even more. He had no money.
That September, Bryant admitted himself to a local psychiatric ward in Virginia. Though she was proud of Bryant's decision to enter rehabilitation, Joyce wasn't sure their marriage could be saved.
I always believed that you stay in your marriage. But I had gone through all the abuse, all the drinking. He just had changed so much. I decided I was going ahead with divorce.
In November 2011, after he was discharged from the psychiatric ward, Joyce finally felt Bryant was strong enough to move forward with divorce proceedings.
He called me up and he started screaming at me.
What is this, Joyce? What is this you just sent me?
And then he said, I don't want a divorce. I could tell he was drunk. And he just started screaming at me again.
You can kiss my goodbye. You are a piece of
Either he was crying uncontrollably and saying how he missed her so much, or you can go to hell, I don't need you.
I'll find somebody else.
It was phenomenal, the number of calls.
So finally, one day I picked up the phone. He said he wanted to come see me about the divorce.
At the very least, Bryant told Joyce he could help her prepare the house for the winter by chopping wood and turning off the pipes.
I didn't know how to do that stuff, and I said, yeah, come on up, let's work around the house.
After 8 years of marriage, Joyce agreed to one last meeting on December 1st, 2011, just 1 month before their divorce would be final.
He told me he had cleaned up his act.
Off the booze.
He said, I have nothing.
I'm nothing without.
I said, I just can't do it anymore.
You know, Brian, I really hope we can be friends.
But our marriage is over.
I understand.
It was getting dark. And so he didn't turn off the faucets, he didn't help me cut wood, and he said, well, the next day he would help me.
Oh, outstanding.
Joyce went to sleep feeling as though she may have made some headway with Bryant.
I opened up my eyes, and he was standing over me with a knife.
What are you doing?
And what Bryant did next would change Joyce's life forever.
Hello, this is 911.
I killed my wife.
In the early morning of December 2nd, 2011, Joyce Soa woke to her worst nightmare.
What are you doing?
He was silent, and the look on his face was horrid.
What are you doing?
It felt like a brick had just slammed into me. I couldn't breathe. I reached over and grabbed the phone. I dialed 911.
Someone is
killing me.
And when I said that, he stabbed me in the back. I mean, he was out to kill me. I don't know how, but I got the knife away from him, and then I knew I had to get away.
Hello?
Hello, this is 911.
I killed my wife.
Okay, sir, stay on the phone with me.
Strangely, Bryant did as the 911 operator instructed, holding a cloth on Joyce's chest wound to stop the bleeding.
He could have run away, but he knew that she had implicated him.
Police, let me see your hands! Let me see your hands!
Police immediately arrested Bryant, charging him with attempted first-degree murder as EMTs worked to frantically save Joyce's life.
I need a helicopter right away!
They flew her to a trauma center, and they were able to save her life.
When Joyce finally awoke after major surgery, she was told the knife had missed her heart by inches.
It collapsed my lungs. I was not only bleeding to death, but I couldn't breathe. I'm really lucky to be alive.
I was in total shock. I didn't know that he was violent, that he was capable of something like that.
As Joyce's body healed, she struggled to make sense of Bryant's actions, despite glimpses of his anger over the years with her and his ex-wife.
He was just verbally abusive. I never, ever would have dreamed that he would have tried something like this, ever.
On September 4th, 2013, after 3 failed attempts to be found mentally unfit for trial, Bryant Parker accepted a plea deal and pled guilty to 1 count of malicious wounding.
I didn't think he was mentally ill. I think, honestly, it was to get whatever he thought it was still in his name. Because he was broke, he had no money, and the divorce was going to be final in January.
She was his meal ticket. He didn't have to work. He had this beautiful house. And then when he realized it was going to be all over, he was desperate.
I think he thought, kill her, I'll get off, mental illness. I think he knew what he was doing.
On October 1st, 2013, Bryant Parker was sentenced to 20 years in prison, with 4 years suspended.
That 4 years suspended was because he put the cloth on her to stop the bleeding, which might have contributed to saving her life.
Whatever made Bryant snap, Joyce knew for sure she'd witnessed the slow descent of a madman.
I was very angry. I had put up with Bryant losing every job, not contributing any income, drinking. He was a bum, and he had bled me dry.
In the years since she was attacked, Joyce has remained on disability and still suffers from PTSD.
Every day, I woke up. First thing in my mind was the stabbing. They tried to murder me. I was lost for 2 full years. I didn't know what to do with myself.
She always have been a strong woman. I think that is prevailing now. She's getting stronger.
Now, Joyce has found a way to channel her experience as a domestic abuse victims advocate.
I speak about once a month, and I relive everything that happened to me so that people can learn from my mistakes.
Growing up in Prunedale, California, 15-year-old Carrie Rogers thought nothing was cooler than cruising the main drag with her friends.
We'd kind of just go 5 miles an hour. We just just listen to music and just kind of hang out. I wasn't looking for anything other than that at 15.
In the summer of 1991, when one of her friends introduced her to 18-year-old Lonnie Keith from a neighboring school, Carrie couldn't help but notice his flashy car.
It's a really nice car. My friend asked him if he would take me for a cruise, and he said yes.
Can we go for a ride?
He was older, I liked his car. There was definitely something about him that caught my eye. At the end of our time together, I just gave him my phone number.
I'm calling you.
And I wanted to hang out more.
Before long, a romance took off with no stop sign in sight.
She brought him over, and I liked him right away. He was a nice kid. He was friendly, just a good guy.
Over the next 2 years, the high school sweethearts spent as much time as they could together. When Carrie graduated high school and Lonnie enrolled at a university 2 hours away, she knew she'd be following him there.
Thought that would be really fun to finally be able to just have an adult relationship. So I was really excited.
In September of 1994, the two moved into their new apartment, ready to live life in the real world.
I worked at a grocery store, so I bought all the groceries. It was a lot of fun kind of playing like a married couple.
Of course, their relationship had the telltale signs of any young couple figuring things out for the first time.
I found that I was the only one cleaning and cooking, so we had arguments.
All the time.
But I had to just bite the bullet, and we had to just compromise.
You're right. I'm sorry. All right, from now on, I'll make time. I'll try now, all right?
Yet 6 months later, Carrie and Lonnie were arguing over more than just dirty dishes.
I walked in one night and saw Lonnie watching porn on TV, and I was livid.
Lonnie, why are you watching this?
It's not my fault. I invited my friend over. He said he wanted...
You guys are watching porn again?
Lonnie claimed the videos weren't his.
It only just started.
I want you to stop this, Lonnie.
Absolutely. Come on, you know me. It won't happen again.
But when Carrie caught Lonnie watching porn several more times by himself, she felt she couldn't ignore this new habit.
I just felt really disrespected. Here I see these, beautiful girls. I'm thinking, wow, it must be me. It must be me.
I can't take this anymore. I'm leaving, Lonnie.
Hey, come on.
Carrie moved to Paradise, California to be near her mother and attend beauty school. Still, despite the geographical distance between them, Carrie and Lonnie were never truly apart.
I definitely missed him, but we talked every night.
When Carrie suggested Lonnie start taking classes at Chico State University, just like that, the two were back together. The young couple moved into an apartment 20 minutes from the campus, and this time they wanted to make it serious.
We've been talking about getting engaged, and I was excited to take it to the next step and to be Lonnie's wife.
Unfortunately, the engagement wasn't a magic cure-all for the couple's issues.
I would wake up in the middle of the night, and Lonnie wouldn't be there. So I crept into the living room as quietly as I could and caught him watching the pornographic material again.
What are you watching?
Nothing. What are you doing up?
Then quickly he'd try to turn it off, but I knew what it was. I wasn't stupid.
When Carrie discovered she was pregnant that October, Lonnie's bad habits no longer seemed like a deal breaker.
I told her a lot of people do watch it, and that didn't really bother me that much.
That summer, the soon-to-be parents said their vows in a small ceremony at a local park. 3 weeks later, Carrie gave birth to a baby boy.
It was neat to see Lonnie be so excited about being a dad. It was just a really fun time.
But Carrie's happiness would be short-lived when she discovered that old habits die hard.
He was a monster. Everybody was totally shocked.
I was sick to my stomach. I thought, this can't be happening.
In the summer of 1998, newlyweds Carrie and Lonnie Keith were thrilled to welcome a son into the world.
We had a whole new role being parents and not just a couple anymore. We were now a family. So that was really neat.
By 2002, they welcomed 2 more children into their growing family. After graduating and becoming a physician's assistant, Lonnie began working countless hours at 2 medical centers, one in Chico, the other 35 minutes away in Oroville.
The hours were very grueling. He went to work at one hospital in the morning until about 4 or 5, and then went to the other hospital around 7.
After the birth of their 4th child in 2010, it seemed the steam was hissing out of their relationship.
I was home with 3 preteens and then a newborn. It was a lot of work. He was hardly home. I felt like a single mom. I can't keep doing this.
You don't help around the house. Something's gotta give, Lonnie.
We were not intimate anymore. Just can't keep going on.
I know it's tough right now, but once we're out of debt, it's gonna be a lot easier. You just have to stick with it.
So it made me think, okay, maybe I could just suck it up and just deal with it.
One day that October, just before Halloween, Carrie's husband received an unusual text message.
I wanted to play on his new phone, but when I was on it, I intercepted a text. What it said was, send me a picture of you and the kids in their costumes. I said, what is this?
You can't see it, okay? It's work stuff.
And I said, okay, like, that didn't sound like a work-related topic whatsoever.
It's work-related.
Something told me, that it wasn't right.
That night, Carrie decided to look into their phone records.
I came across a number that had come up quite a bit in the last, couple of weeks. So I went ahead and called it.
You reached Natalie. Please leave a message.
I immediately started yelling at him, asking him what it was.
What is this?
What are you doing?
Are you having an affair?
No, it's not what you think.
I don't believe you.
We're just friends. She's a coworker.
There's nothing. We just text.
Completely rattled, Carrie couldn't get beyond her suspicions of Natalie.
I found out where she lived, and I went to her house.
I just kept thinking, Lonnie wouldn't do that. But Carrie kept trying to find evidence of him cheating.
What are you doing here? I am not having an affair with your husband. I know you're seeing him. Leave me alone.
Carrie wasn't proud of her actions, but she was determined to get to the bottom of the gut feeling she had that Lonnie was lying. And she was finding plenty of other bizarre things to question.
One day I went into the garage. I just started kind of looking around for a box that had old VHS tapes. I found zip ties, thigh-high nylons, and a syringe that had fluid in it. I definitely thought that was weird.
What is this?
He said, the nylons, those are yours, and the needles, those are left over from the night before, left in his lab coat, and he forgot to discard it.
The zip ties are for basic stuff that I'm doing around here. I mean, look at this.
Why are all these things hidden?
Lonnie confessed he felt the need to hide everything from Carrie because she made such a huge deal out of even the smallest things. But Carrie knew better.
I thought that the items were for his mistress. I thought they were doing weird things.
I say, gosh, Carrie, you're being really hard on him. He's working the late shift. He's tired. I go, you're nagging on him. I go, back off. Just let it go.
With 4 kids to care for, Carrie felt she had no choice but to trust her husband.
I had nothing else to go on. He had the perfect answer to every single question.
1 year later, it was getting even harder for her to believe her husband when an unexpected package arrived in the mail. And what Carrie found inside made her heart skip a beat.
I couldn't believe that he would do anything like this. It was literally making Carrie go crazy.
I just had enough, and I wanted answers.
December 2011, Carrie Keith was having a tough time believing her husband Lonnie was faithful, especially after an odd package arrived in the mail.
When I opened it, there were women's thigh-high nylons with lace at the top. And I said, "What is this?"
Well, listen, it's not what you think.
He said they were for me.
It was a Christmas present.
That was something that he liked me to wear on occasion. So I just figured he'd pick them out.
Why in the world would I ever cheat on you?
Lonnie was saying and doing all the right things, including insisting they see a marriage counselor. But none of it was sitting well in Carrie's gut.
Lonnie said that this other woman and him never had an affair, but in the back of her mind, she still felt that Lonnie was lying.
When the new year came, Carrie suggested Lonnie move out while they attend counseling to give her some space to think. It didn't last long.
Kids miss you.
The pair remained in close contact, working on their marriage together.
I'm gonna try to change. I'm gonna stop snooping.
I want to make this work.
Carrie allowed Lonnie to move back home in May 2012.
He was starting to be more caring. They were going to counseling, and I thought, well, maybe it was working.
But it always seemed that just when Carrie had gotten a grip, something else would happen to send her back into a tailspin. That August, Carrie awoke in the middle of the night with a strange feeling.
Lonnie wasn't there. I thought he should have been home by now. So I quickly got on my phone, and there was a tracker that came standard with the phone, and I just started tracking him.
Her husband was nowhere near his job.
He was in downtown Chico. I immediately thought of the mistress. My first thought was, she moved to Chico.
Furious, Carrie called Lonnie, who insisted he was 35 minutes away in Oroville at work.
I said, "Really? Because I see you right now."
You're in downtown Chico.
All of a sudden, I started seeing the dot move on the way to the freeway to head south, back to work.
I can see you moving.
I'm at the hospital.
Why don't you prove to me that you're at work? Why don't you call me on the landline?
40 minutes later, Lonnie did just that, but Carrie knew what she had seen.
He calls from an Oroville work phone number and says, "Look, I'm here." And I'm, thinking to myself, well, yeah, because you drove back. He explained, "Oh, these GPS things, they mess up all the time."
Why are you lying to me?
I was very frustrated. I just didn't trust him. It felt like he was definitely messing with my mind. And there were times where I would go into my bedroom and just cry.
Carrie wondered if she was going crazy, but she wouldn't worry much longer.
I had woken up at 6 in the morning. I texted Lonnie and I said, "Another late night," and I didn't hear from him.
Carrie got dressed in a hurry, convinced she knew where he was, at his mistress's.
I wanted to catch Lonnie in the act. I just needed to see his car. I had to finally have the proof. I opened up the garage and...
Are you Carrie Keith?
Yes, officer.
I saw a Chico police officer. I thought that Lonnie was in a horrible accident. I couldn't believe that this could be happening. I was terrified.
On the morning of January 27th, 2013, Carrie Keith feared the worst as police swarmed her front yard.
I asked the police officer, "What's going on?"
Has there been an accident?
We can't talk about that right now, but we'll talk.
Come on inside.
When detectives explained what was happening, all Carrie could do was sit in stunned silence.
The Chico Police Department had been engaged in an ongoing investigation, kidnappings and sexual assault cases that had been taking place at Chico State.
Over the last 2 years, 11 assaults were reported around the Chico State campus. Police set up surveillance, and the previous night they noticed a car cruising the area for over an hour.
Investigators watched the vehicle, and when it failed to come to a complete stop at a stop sign, they had probable cause to pull the car over, and they made contact with the driver, who happened to be Lonnie Keith.
Good evening. Great. What brings you to the area?
I know, just driving back from work.
They noticed some blankets in the backseat area of the car, which was significant because one of the victims said the car that she had been put into as being like a cave of blankets.
Mind if we take a look around the vehicle?
The officers were alarmed by what else they found.
They found syringes loaded with clear liquid. There were 2 pairs of nylons. They also located athletic tape.
Can you explain what's going on over here?
Yeah, I'm a physician's assistant.
Police didn't buy it. Instead, they brought Lonnie to the station for further questioning.
The stockings were significant because the victim had said that the person that grabbed her off the street was wearing a stocking over his face. 2 remembered being zip-tied and tape being used on their mouth or their eyes and being injected.
When police obtained a search warrant, they discovered more disturbing evidence.
There were zip ties found in the trunk of the car, leg restraints, and handcuffs. There were vials of Haldol and diphenhydramine. And in combination, it basically knocks a person out.
Officers immediately arrested Lonnie, charging him with rape, assault with intent to commit rape, and 2 counts of kidnapping.
We believe that everything was ready to go. The car was set up, the windows were covered, the syringes were loaded. All he needed to do was find somebody.
Carrie was completely dumbfounded. Her husband of 16 years was a stranger.
I thought, this can't be happening. You have the wrong person. But then I started to really think back on the things that I'd found.
And Carrie couldn't forget the night Lonnie's GPS tracker placed him near the Chico University campus.
I feel like that night he could have been on the prowl looking for a young girl. I was sick to my stomach just thinking that my husband could be responsible for this.
I don't understand.
I think I had on these blinders. Every time I found something, I thought, oh, that's for the mistress, almost like she was a decoy.
Your husband's been having an affair with a woman at work.
To make matters worse, Carrie's suspicions about the affair were also true. Lonnie's co-worker Natalie admitted to sleeping with Lonnie for over a year.
Lonnie would always make me feel like I was the crazy one, like I was just looking for things to be wrong. But it was exactly what I thought, and then some.
Just before Lonnie's trial, the police were able to link Lonnie to a 3rd assault that occurred before the other 2 in the spring of 2012.
We were just trying to get through the first 2 and then to have a 3rd one pop up. Everybody was totally shocked.
We all believe that Lonnie was responsible for more than the 3 that he was charged with.
I can't even wrap my mind around it.
A former Chico physician's assistant changes his plea to guilty today.
In August of 2014, Lonnie accepted a plea deal, copping to 3 counts of kidnapping and 1 count of forceful rape.
Lonnie's DNA was found on one of the victim's underwear. He couldn't lie his way out of it.
Lonnie Keith was sentenced to 26 years in a California state prison.
He took away a lot of our hopes and our dreams. It is a good thing that he's in a place where he can't hurt anybody anymore. It's just a sad thing that it had to come to this.
Carrie still doesn't know for sure what changed in Lonnie.
It saddens me to think that Lonnie was this guy that maybe I didn't even know.
In that picture right there?
I've never been able to get answers from Lonnie. He still won't admit that he is behind the rapes. Even though he did take a plea, he will not take responsibility for this.
Perhaps one day she'll find the answers. But in the meantime, Carrie's determined to move forward in life.
Carrie's been set free because she knows where he is, can't lie, and he can't hurt anybody anymore.
I have 4 kids. Without them, I probably would have given up. But I think they make me stronger. I can't let them down.
The history of true crime is often punctuated by moments of sudden, shattering realization. There are days that begin like any other, only to end with a revelation so profoundly disturbing that it irrevocably alters the landscape of a community and the collective memory of a nation. For the city of Houston, Texas, and indeed for the entire American law enforcement system, that day was August the 8th, 1973. It was on this late summer morning that a single, frantic telephone call pierced the routine hum of the local police dispatch. On the other end of the line was a 16-year-old boy named Elmer Wayne Henley. His voice, likely trembling with a volatile mixture of adrenaline, fear, and the lingering haze of narcotics, delivered a confession that would unravel one of the darkest and most extensive chapters of human depravity ever recorded in the United States. He stated simply and chillingly that he had just shot a man, and he justified this fatal act by declaring that this man had killed a great many of his friends. This was not the boast of a hardened gangster, nor was it a typical domestic dispute. It was the frantic breaking point of a monstrous, 3-year reign of terror that had operated entirely in the shadows of a sunlit, bustling Texan metropolis. When the authorities finally arrived at the scene, they did not just find the body of a man who had been shot 6 times with a .22 caliber pistol. They found the architect of a sprawling nightmare, a man who had systematically orchestrated the abduction, torture, and murder of at least 28 young men and boys. This was the sudden, violent end to the Houston mass murders and the unmasking of the predator known to his unsuspecting victims simply as the Candyman. To understand the sheer magnitude of this tragedy and how it went undetected for 3 agonizing years between 1970 and 1973, one must first look at the environment in which it was allowed to fester. The hunting ground was not a desolate wasteland or a shadowy, crime-ridden underbelly of the city. It was the Heights, a distinctly working-class neighborhood in Houston. In the early 1970s, the Heights was a community defined by hard work, modest homes, and families striving to make ends meet. It was a place where parents often worked long hours, sometimes juggling multiple jobs or exhausting shifts just to provide the basic necessities for their households. Because of this economic reality, the children and teenagers of the Heights were afforded a significant degree of independence. Young boys, ranging in age from 13 to 20 years old, were frequently left to their own devices during the long, sweltering Texas summers and the quiet hours after school. They roamed the neighborhoods, hung out on street corners, hitched rides, and sought out whatever meager entertainment the local streets could offer. This environment of benign neglect, born out of economic necessity rather than a lack of parental love, created a landscape of vulnerable youth. They were boys on the cusp of manhood, restless, trusting, and fiercely loyal to their peer groups. They were exactly the type of victims a patient and calculating predator would seek. Compounding this vulnerability was a systemic failure of staggering proportions on the part of the Houston Police Department at the time. As the years ticked by and the number of missing boys from the Heights steadily grew, panic and despair began to take root in the hearts of dozens of families. Parents would wake up to empty beds, wait anxiously by front windows as the sun went down, and eventually walk into police precincts with photographs of their smiling, innocent sons, begging for help. Yet, their pleas were routinely met with a wall of bureaucratic apathy. The prevailing law enforcement doctrine regarding missing teenagers in that era was disastrously dismissive. Instead of launching comprehensive investigations or connecting the dots between the escalating number of disappearances in a single geographical area, the authorities consistently categorized these missing boys as runaways. The narrative constructed by the police was that these youths had simply grown tired of their working-class lives, rebelled against their parents, and decided to hitchhike away to seek adventure elsewhere. The agonizing reports filed by desperate mothers and fathers were essentially filed away and forgotten. This institutional negligence provided the killer with the ultimate camouflage. It granted him a terrifying immunity, allowing him to operate with impunity, secure in the knowledge that no one in a position of power was actively looking for the boys he was taking, nor were they looking for him. The monster operating within this perfect storm of vulnerable youth and apathetic authority did not look like a monster. He did not skulk in the shadows or fit the cinematic profile of a deranged lunatic. His name was Dean Coral, and his public persona was meticulously crafted to exude safety, generosity, and community spirit. Coral owned and operated a small, family-run candy manufacturing business in Houston. In a working-class neighborhood where luxuries were scarce, a man who made candy was naturally a figure of fascination and delight. But Coral went beyond simply running a business. He actively cultivated an image as a benevolent, grandfatherly figure, despite being a relatively young man himself. He was known throughout the Heights as a gentle, soft-spoken, and incredibly generous individual. He made it a regular practice to hand out free candy to the children and teenagers who lived nearby. He would greet them with a warm smile, offer them sweets, and present himself as a safe harbor in their often chaotic lives. The nickname the Candyman was not a sinister moniker bestowed upon him by the press after his crimes were discovered. It was a term of endearment given to him by the very community he was preying upon. This flawless facade of the friendly neighborhood candy maker was the cornerstone of his methodology. Coral understood that to capture his preferred victims, teenage boys and young men, he could not simply snatch them off the street by force without drawing attention. He needed them to come to him willingly. He needed them to feel completely at ease in his presence. By establishing himself as the generous Candyman, he neutralized their natural defenses. To the boys of the Heights, Dean Coral was not a threat. He was a friend, a provider of treats, and a seemingly cool older guy who didn't judge them. This calculated grooming process was deeply insidious. It exploited the innocence and the natural trust of youth, twisting a symbol of childhood joy, candy, into a silent, deadly trap. The parents trusted him because he was a local business owner who was kind to their children. The police had no reason to suspect a mild-mannered candy manufacturer of any wrongdoing. Coral had successfully embedded himself into the very fabric of the community, standing in plain sight while harboring a darkness that was entirely unimaginable to those around him. However, as Coral's horrific appetites grew, he realized that his benign public image alone was not enough to maintain the steady supply of victims he desired. As boys began to vanish, a natural, albeit slow, undercurrent of caution might eventually ripple through the neighborhood. Furthermore, convincing older teenagers, those approaching 18 or 20, to come to his home required more than just the promise of free candy. To overcome these logistical hurdles and to completely bypass the defense mechanisms of his targets, Coral implemented a strategy of profound psychological manipulation and betrayal. He recruited accomplices from within the very demographic he was targeting. He recognized that teenagers were far more likely to trust their own peers than they were to trust an adult, even a friendly one. Coral set his sights on two local boys to serve as his procurers, 15-year-old David Brooks and 16-year-old Elmer Wayne Henley. These were not hardened criminals. They were neighborhood kids, woven into the same social circles as the victims. Coral leveraged his wealth, which was substantial compared to the meager resources of the working-class teenagers, to compromise the moral compass of these two boys. He used cash and a steady supply of narcotics to lure Brooks and Henley into his inner circle. Once they were dependent on him for money and drugs, he transformed them into his accomplices, his bait. The mechanics of this betrayal are perhaps the most chilling aspect of the entire case. Brooks and Henley were tasked with scouring the neighborhood, approaching their own schoolmates, friends, and acquaintances. They used the universal currency of teenage socialization to lay the traps. They would approach a target and offer an invitation that seemed impossible to refuse, an exclusive party at a cool older guy's house, complete with free beer, unlimited drugs, and a place to hang out away from the prying eyes of parents. For the boys of the Heights, an invitation from a friend like Brooks or Henley to a party with free alcohol and narcotics was a golden ticket. There was absolutely no reason for them to feel afraid. They were walking into the home of the local Candyman, accompanied by people they had known for years. They believed they were stepping into an evening of illicit, adolescent fun. They had no way of knowing that a price tag had been placed on their heads. For every successful abduction, every time Brooks and Henley managed to deliver a trusting peer through Coral's front door, the Candyman paid them a bounty. The sums were staggering for the era and the neighborhood, ranging from $200 to $2,000 per victim. It was a transaction of human life that turned friends into commodities and teenagers into Judas figures. This unholy trinity operated with devastating efficiency. The community remained oblivious, the police remained indifferent, and the boys continued to disappear into the void. The victims walked willingly across the threshold of Dean Corll's home, expecting a party, a temporary escape from their daily lives. They brought with them their youth, their trust, and their complete vulnerability. Once the door clicked shut behind them, the facade of the benevolent Candyman instantly dissolved. The free beer and the drugs were not meant for celebration. They were intended as the first stage of incapacitation. As the narcotics took hold and the victims' senses dulled, the environment around them shifted from a welcoming haven into a chamber of unimaginable horrors. They were about to discover that the man who handed out sweets on the corner was merely a mask, and the friends who had brought them there were the architects of their doom. The transition from the warm, trusting atmosphere of the heights to the cold, calculated nightmare waiting inside that house marks the true beginning of the tragedy, setting the stage for a period of suffering that remains etched as one of the darkest stains on American criminal history. When the heavy wooden door of Dean Corll's residence closed behind the new recruits, the fate of these young men was instantly sealed, though they were still completely oblivious to the impending tragedy. They crossed that threshold with the carefree attitude of youth, carried by absolute trust in their peers, Elmer Wayne Henley and David Brooks, who had guided them to this supposed haven. Inside, the scene was meticulously orchestrated to dispel any lingering suspicion. The host, known throughout the neighborhood as the reassuring candy store owner, greeted them with a fatherly smile and feigned generosity. The initial atmosphere was that of an ordinary clandestine party, an escape for teenagers from working-class neighborhoods where entertainment was scarce. Alcohol flowed freely, accompanied by various illicit substances skillfully offered to ease the tension. Laughter echoed in the living room, a testament to the fleeting success of this macabre illusion. However, this abundance was in reality nothing more than a formidable chemical weapon. Each sip of beer, each toxic inhalation, brought the victims closer to the abyss. The toxins silently seeped into their bloodstreams, slowing their reflexes, clouding their judgment, and gradually draining their life force. Dizziness slowly took hold, transforming the familiar room into a shifting, blurry space. This was the calculated baiting of the trap, the essential silent neutralization phase before the predator's true face was revealed in all its devastating atrocity. As the narcotic effects reached their peak, the veil of illusion was brutally torn away, plunging the victims into a terrifying state of disorientation. Their limbs, once agile and full of youthful energy, became unbearably heavy, refusing to respond to the commands of a now numb brain. It was at this precise moment of maximum vulnerability that the atmosphere of the room underwent a chilling transformation. Dean Corll's warm smile vanished without a trace, replaced by the fixed, merciless expression of a sadistic predator eyeing its defenseless prey. The boys' initial confusion morphed into a dull panic as they looked to their friends, Henley and Brooks, for support, only to finally grasp the horrifying extent of the betrayal. These supposed confidants stood back, observing the scene with chilling apathy or, worse still, preparing to assist the executioner in his destructive work. The house, which only moments before had promised freedom and entertainment, closed in on them like an impenetrable tomb. The walls seemed to thicken, absorbing the echo of their first gasps of absolute terror. In an act of premeditated dehumanization, the victims were violently stripped of their clothes. This forced nudity was not merely a preparation for physical torture. Its primary purpose was to annihilate their dignity, to reduce them to mere fleshly objects, vulnerable and shameful. Terror replaced stupor, a visceral fear that paralyzed any rational thought, as they understood with horrifying clarity that kindness was nothing but a deadly bait. The nerve center of this chamber of horrors resided in a device specifically designed by the murderer to embody his thirst for absolute domination, an infamous construction later dubbed the torture board. It was not an object improvised in a fit of rage, but the product of meticulous engineering, revealing the deeply premeditated and obsessive nature of Dean Corll's actions. Made from a solid panel of thick plywood, this morbid structure was equipped with a complex and merciless system of physical restraint. Thick leather straps, chosen for their unbreakable strength, were attached to the ends, along with heavy steel handcuffs and rough ropes. Every element of this device had been calculated to eradicate any possibility of movement, instantly neutralizing the victim's survival instinct and ability to fight back. When the adolescents' weakened bodies were brutally thrown onto the rigid surface, the metallic clang of the handcuffs locking around their wrists and the creak of the leather around their ankles sounded like the death knell of their existence. Stretched apart, completely immobilized, and exposed in utter vulnerability, the young men lost sovereignty over their own physical selves. The board became their entire universe, a sacrificial altar from which all hope was banished. This total physical constraint was accompanied by a devastating psychological collapse, the mind inevitably fracturing under the weight of utter powerlessness in the face of the embodiment of boundless evil. Once the victim was permanently fixed to this altar of suffering, a cycle of torment began, the intensity and duration of which defy the limits of human imagination. The torture was never a swift execution, for Dean Corll's satisfaction lay not in mere death, but in the methodical orchestration of pain, humiliation, and prolonged terror. The horror unfolded as a succession of physical and psychological abuses of unimaginable savagery. The bound teenagers endured repeated sexual assaults of relentless brutality, designed to defile them to the very core of their being. But the executioner's cruelty knew no physiological limits. Using modified electrical cables, he inflicted searing shocks on the most sensitive areas of their bruised bodies, causing agonizing convulsions and deep burns. The heart-rending, inhuman cries of pain were muffled by the soundproofing of the house, lost in the silence of a perfectly indifferent residential neighborhood. These torture sessions could stretch into endless hours, sometimes extending over several consecutive days. Corll toyed with his victims' endurance, artificially keeping them on the edge of consciousness, granting them brief respites only to renew the intensity of their terror when the abuse resumed. Time lost all rational meaning for these young boys, replaced by an eternity of pure suffering, punctuated only by the erratic beating of their own terrified hearts and the menacing shadow of their torturer moving in the gloom of the macabre room. When the predator's sadistic thirst finally reached its point of satiety, after hours or days of systematic destruction of will and flesh, the hour of final execution struck irrevocably. This killing was not an act of mercy intended to shorten suffering. It was a cold and logical continuation of his ritual of annihilation. The methods employed to wrest the last breath of life demonstrated chilling efficiency and a complete absence of human empathy. In some cases, favoring direct physical contact and domination until the very last second, Corll would wrap a strong, rough rope around the bruised neck of the exhausted victim. He would slowly but inexorably tighten the noose, watching life gradually leave the terrified teenager's eyes as suffocation did its deadly work. Asphyxiation was an intimate, prolonged death, demanding terrifying strength and determination from the killer. At other times, opting for a more expeditious but equally brutal conclusion, he would seize his .22-gauge pistol. Gun in hand, he calmly positioned himself behind the still-bound victim, placed the cold barrel against the back of his skull or between his innocent shoulder blades, and squeezed the trigger with a mechanical, calculated indifference. The muffled detonation marked the brutal end of a young life, forever freezing the expression of absolute terror on the victim's face. The spilled blood definitively sealed the teenager's fate, transforming the torture chamber into a crime scene of unbearable morbidity for any normal conscience. Immediately after the clinical confirmation of death, the atmosphere in the room underwent a final transformation, shifting from sadistic frenzy to the cold logistics of methodical concealment. The body, which just days before had housed the dreams and energy of a young man, was now perceived by Dean Corll as nothing more than a cumbersome piece of organic waste threatening his freedom and safety. To rigorously erase all traces of his abominations and prevent the pestilential stench of decomposition from alerting the sleeping neighbors, he implemented a meticulously honed disposal protocol. The inert corpse was liberally doused with quicklime powder, a corrosive chemical compound specifically chosen for its ability to accelerate the putrefaction of organic tissues while effectively masking unwanted odors of death. Once chemically treated, the body was meticulously wrapped in thick, waterproof, and completely opaque vinyl tarpaulins. Coral tightly sealed these synthetic shrouds with wide strips of industrial tape, creating anonymous, airtight packages devoid of any human characteristics or residual dignity. These macabre cocoons, heavy with the weight of slaughtered innocents, were then discreetly loaded into his vehicle under the protective and complicit cover of the Texas night. The murderer would then embark on macabre, silent expeditions to burial sites carefully selected for their geographic isolation. The majority of these young victims would meet a miserable end beneath the dirt floor of a boathouse discreetly rented in the isolated outskirts of South Houston, which, over the months, had been transformed into a veritable secret underground mass grave. Other decomposing bodies were secretly transported to the desolate stretches of remote beaches on the Bolivar Peninsula, hastily buried beneath the cold sand swept by relentless coastal winds, or callously abandoned in the damp, forested areas bordering the silent, misty shores of vast Lake Sam Rayburn. These immense clandestine cemeteries concealed the unbearable reality of a massacre of truly terrifying proportions for the American nation. For 3 long, consecutive years, this infernal cycle of unspeakable horrors continued in absolute and terrifying silence, methodically wiping out an entire generation of innocent and defenseless young men, until a completely unforeseen daytime event finally broke this appalling chain of destructive violence and revealed the staggering extent of this waking nightmare. The heavy, suffocating atmosphere of the Texas summer seemed to weigh unusually heavily on Houston at dusk on the 7th day of August, 1973, silently heralding the imminent cataclysmic rupture in the well-oiled machinery of absolute horror. That night, the macabre routine established by Dean Coral, the seemingly benevolent confectioner, and his young accomplices would take a fatal turn, an unforeseen flaw that would bring down the nightmarish edifice they had built in the shadows over 3 long years. Elmer Wayne Henley, the 16-year-old whose innocence had long since been traded for a few dollars and artificial paradises, arrived at the killer's residence with new potential victims. However, the makeup of this group differed significantly from the usual pattern of targeting only isolated young boys. Henley had indeed invited a friend named Timothy Curley to this supposed party, as well as a young woman by the name of Rhonda Williams. The introduction of a female presence into this den of male destruction constituted a major anomaly in Coral's predatory ritual, a chaotic variable inserted into a death equation that had hitherto been perfectly controlled. Nevertheless, beneath the veneer of artificial conviviality and the irresistible allure of free alcohol and generously distributed narcotics, the evening began according to the tragically familiar script, quickly plunging the guests into an illusory torpor, unaware of the darkness that thickened around them as the night progressed and the toxic substances inexorably numbed their senses and judgment. The transition from the illusory celebration to the tangible nightmare occurred in the dark recesses of chemical unconsciousness. Elmer Wayne Henley, believing himself safe because of his privileged status as supplier and accomplice, had himself succumbed to the powerful effects of the narcotics he had consumed during the night, sinking into a deep, artificial sleep, convinced that his alliance, sealed in blood and guilt, protected him from his mentor's murderous madness. But the awakening that awaited him in the early morning of August 8th was of such absolute psychological and physical brutality that it defied all rationality. As he painfully emerged from the thick drug haze, the teenager's senses were instantly assailed by an inconceivable reality. His limbs, once free to move in this house of death, were now firmly bound. The hard, unforgiving surface he felt against his back was none other than the infamous torture board, that solid wooden altar designed by Coral to annihilate any will to survive. Turning his head, fighting the visceral panic that threatened to paralyze his mind, Henley discovered with horror that his 2 companions in misfortune, Timothy Curley and Rhonda Williams, shared his miserable fate, tightly bound and at the mercy of the monster. The accomplice had suddenly become the prey. The boundary he believed impassable between executioner and victim had just vanished with a bloody stroke. Dean Corll's betrayal was total, absolute, revealing the true and insatiable nature of his thirst for destruction, which was no longer encumbered by any loyalty, not even to those who had helped him fill his silent mass graves. Dean Corll's face, stripped of its usual mask of feigned kindness, now displayed the implacable coldness of a predator ready to consume his final victims. Towering over the 3 captive bodies, the confectioner uttered threats of unprecedented violence, detailing with sadistic relish the tortures and inevitable death he had in store for each of them. For Henley, the terror of imminent death clashed violently with the most primal instinct for survival. Realizing that brute force would be utterly useless against Corll's arsenal and determination, the teenager had to draw upon the darkest resources of his intellect to devise a last-ditch strategy. A psychological duel of unbearable intensity then ensued in the oppressive silence of the room. Suppressing the panic screaming in his veins, Henley adopted a posture of total submission and renewed complicity. He addressed his tormentor not as a pleading victim, but as the obedient partner he had always been. With a persuasive force born of utter despair, the teenager begged Corll to untie him, arguing that he would be far more useful free. He promised his unconditional help in subduing Timothy and Rhonda, to actively participate in their torture, cynically playing on Corll's ego and the deeply ingrained habit of their criminal collaboration. It was a macabre gamble, a lie uttered on the razor's edge where the slightest hesitation, the slightest dissonance in the teenager's voice would have sealed his immediate death warrant. Time seemed to stand still in the torture chamber as Corll weighed his former accomplice's proposition. In a fatal miscalculation, blinded by a sense of invulnerability and the arrogant certainty of having total control over the young man's mind, the serial killer accepted the pact. With agonizing slowness, he approached the board and began to undo the heavy leather straps and rough ropes that bound Elmer Wayne Henley's wrists and ankles. The moment his limbs were freed from their deadly grip, an overwhelming surge of adrenaline flooded the teenager's system. He knew he would have only a fraction of a second, a single opportunity to reverse the course of fate and put a definitive end to this spiral of unspeakable violence. Feigning to stretch and prepare to assist Corll in his atrocities, Henley feverishly scanned his immediate surroundings. His gaze fell upon the object that alone symbolized the tragic end of dozens of other innocent boys, the killer's .22 caliber pistol, lying within easy reach with a carelessness that would prove fatal to its owner. In a lightning-fast movement dictated by the purest instinct of self-preservation, Henley lunged for the firearm, his fingers snapping frantically around the cold grip. Surprise momentarily froze Dean Corll's features, and with a fraction of a second's delay, he realized the catastrophic magnitude of his lapse in judgment. There was no room for hesitation, no possibility of negotiation, no words spoken. Elmer Wayne Henley pointed the gun directly at the figure of the man who had orchestrated the annihilation of his innocence and that of so many others. The sharp, deafening crack of the first shot ripped through the silence of the room, followed almost instantly by a flurry of erratic, desperate shots. The teenager squeezed the trigger again and again, unleashing his terror, his rage, and his survival instinct in a relentless hail of fire. 6 22-gauge rounds struck Dean Corll's body in succession. The impact of the bullets brought the predator to a screeching halt, his body collapsing heavily to the floor of the very room that had been the silent stage for his unspeakable atrocities. The great man's fall marked the brutal and bloody end of the empire of evil over which he had reigned supreme. The silence that followed the final shot was even more deafening than the gunshots themselves, a silence heavy with the weight of lives lost and the impending revelation of the nightmare. The Houston monster, the murderous confectioner, lay inert and lifeless, felled by the very instrument he had fashioned to serve his macabre purposes. In the immediate moments after Corll fell, the atmosphere in the house shifted from deadly tension to stunned stupor. Henley, breathless, staring blankly ahead, still gripped the smoking gun tightly, barely grasping the irrevocable impact of his actions. The urgency of the situation, however, quickly reasserted itself. His hands still trembling from the waning adrenaline, he rushed to the torture board to hastily free Timothy Curley and Rhonda Williams from their terrifying bonds. The three young people, bound together by the traumatic experience of having come so close to death, found themselves free amidst the scene of horror. However, for Henley, the realization of the situation was infinitely more complex and overwhelming. He was not merely a survivor, he was a crucial cog in a killing machine that had just abruptly stopped. He knew that the body lying on the ground was only the tip of an iceberg of atrocities whose terrifying subterranean geography only he and David Brooks knew. The world had to know. The horror had to be exposed so that ignorance would end and justice, if it were still possible, could begin. With unsteady steps but a sudden burst of resolve, the teenager walked to the residence's telephone, that mundane device that would serve as a bridge between the private hell of his home and the unsuspecting outside world. He feverishly dialed the Houston police emergency number, triggering the collapse of an entire city's carefree existence. When the operator answered, Elmer Wayne Henley's voice rang out, thick with indescribable emotion, a mixture of a child's terror and the resignation of a confessed murderer. He indirectly informed the authorities that he had just shot a man multiple times, justifying his actions with a statement that would chill investigators to the bone and forever alter the nation's criminal history. He explained, his voice breaking, that the man whose body now lay on the floor was responsible for the methodical and brutal murder of a great many of his friends. This simple, unadorned phrase constituted the shattering admission of a tragedy of unimaginable proportions, instantly triggering a shockwave that would sweep away the past indifference of institutions, forcing the light to violently penetrate the darkest and most terrifying corners of human nature, and paving the way for a macabre excavation that would redefine the very notion of horror in the American collective unconscious. The confectioner's empire had fallen, but the nightmare of reality was only just beginning for the grieving families and society as a whole. When Houston law enforcement officers arrived at Dean Corll's residence, guided by Elmer Wayne Henley's broken but revealing voice, they were far from imagining the abyss of darkness that was about to engulf their certainties. The wailing sirens tore through the morning silence of the Heights neighborhood, shattering the illusion of a peaceful and benevolent community. Upon entering the house, the officers immediately discovered the lifeless body of the serial killer lying on the floor, riddled with the bullets that had brutally ended his reign of terror. But this was only the prologue to a labyrinthine and nightmarish investigation. Quickly apprehended alongside his young accomplice David Brooks, Henley, still reeling from his own armed liberation, found himself facing the investigators in the interrogation room. It was in this stifling, claustrophobic setting that the first revelations began to leak, outlining a criminal conspiracy of unsuspected proportions. The teenager, torn between fear of his own legal fate and the desire to clear his conscience, began to speak of the unthinkable. This was not an isolated murder, nor even a simple argument that had gone wrong. Henley's fragmented confessions quickly painted a picture of a structured kidnapping network, a meticulously planned manhunt that had been going on for years amid the general indifference of the authorities. Faced with the gravity of the accusations, investigators realized they had just stepped onto a giant crime scene, extending far beyond the walls of the small confectioner's house, and that the key to this macabre mystery lay entirely in the veracity of the two teenage accomplices' fragmented memories. The real priority for the police was now to corroborate the statements of Elmer Wayne Henley and David Brooks, an arduous task undertaken in an atmosphere of extreme psychological tension. The detectives knew that to unravel the mystery of these serial disappearances that had haunted Houston for 3 long years, they needed to locate the victims' remains, transforming the investigation into a macabre manhunt across the Texas landscape. Brooks, initially adopting a more distant and withdrawn demeanor, began to cooperate with the investigators, driven by the fear of spending the rest of his life in the total oblivion of a high-security cell. It was during these meticulous interrogations that the name of a specific location was first mentioned, an unassuming warehouse in the southern suburbs of Houston that Corll had rented under a false name. This location formed the logistical and sinister heart of the cover-up system implemented by the murderer. The mere mention of this enclosed space immediately sent shockwaves through the investigators, who sensed that the cold, definitive answers they sought were buried somewhere within those four anonymous walls. The police immediately established a cordon and forensic investigation around the hangar, preparing to confront one of the most unbearable realities in the criminal history of the state of Texas. The atmosphere was heavy, almost suffocating, as the forensic teams prepared to cross the threshold, aware that they were about to exhume not only bodies, but also the full extent of a resounding institutional failure that had left dozens of families in anguish and despair for years. When the doors of the South Houston warehouse were finally opened under the blinding spotlights of the forensic technicians, the sight that greeted the investigators surpassed their worst nightmares. The warehouse's dirt floor showed no apparent anomalies at first glance, but David Brooks's precise directions quickly guided the shovels and picks to suspicious areas of fill. From the very first strokes, the earth proved loose, betraying the presence of hastily concealed clandestine graves. The forensic archaeologists proceeded with surgical precision, gradually revealing the unspeakable horror buried beneath the surface. One by one, the bodies of the young victims were exhumed, wrapped in those infamous vinyl tarps and sealed with duct tape, silent testaments to Dean Corll's clinical and methodical approach. The acrid stench of decomposition, mixed with the chemical residue of quicklime, hung heavy over the site, making the investigators work physically and psychologically grueling. Each new burial added to the grim tally, further shattering the city's veneer of innocence. Forensic experts had to conduct complex dental and ballistic analyses to identify the human remains, so deeply altered by time and corrosive substances. This painstaking identification work quickly revealed the generational scope of the massacre. Teenagers between the ages of 13 and 20, torn from their everyday lives, whose disappearances had, for the most part, been hastily dismissed by the Houston police as mere runaways of rebellious youth. The discovery of this giant mass grave acted as a national wake-up call, highlighting the criminal negligence of institutions and the tragic vulnerability of working-class youth in the city's impoverished neighborhoods. But the investigation wasn't limited to the warehouse south of Houston, as testimony from accomplices quickly revealed that Dean Corll's reach extended far beyond the city limits. Additional teams of investigators had to be dispatched to remote and inhospitable geographical areas, guided by the recollections of nighttime drives provided by Henley and Brooks. Among these sites of macabre exile was the distant and windswept Bolivar Peninsula, where the cold sands of the coastal beaches potentially concealed other unspeakable secrets. The searches there were conducted in challenging weather conditions, with sea winds continually erasing landmarks and complicating the task for the search teams. Similarly, the misty shores and dense forests surrounding the vast Sam Rayburn Lake became the scene of intensive underwater and land-based investigations, with investigators combing every square meter for traces of burials. Each new search site confirmed the methodical and obsessive nature of the serial killer, who had transformed the Texas wilderness into a vast, anonymous graveyard. Coordination between the various police jurisdictions, though initially chaotic due to widespread shock, gradually became more structured to cope with the mountain of physical evidence and witness testimonies that were accumulating. Families of the missing, alerted by the extent of the national media coverage that had just taken hold of the case, began to flock to police stations, brandishing old photographs of their sons who had left one day and never returned, hoping against all hope to finally get an answer to their interminable wait. As the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, the investigation revealed the psychological complexity and perverse dynamic that bound the executioner to his young accomplices. The extended interrogations of Elmer Wayne Henley and David Brooks helped map not only the crime scenes, but also the slow transformation of ordinary teenagers into essential cogs in a killing machine. Psychiatrists and criminal profilers examined these two young men to understand how psychological manipulation, combined with the lure of financial gain and drug addiction, had subverted their moral compass to the point of turning them into accomplices in kidnappings and mass murders. Brooks often appeared as a silent executor, terrified of Corll but utterly resigned to his subordinate role, while Henley carried the crushing weight of a dual identity, oscillating between the traumatized victim and the parricidal rescuer who had ultimately put an end to the massacre. The investigation files thus filled with psychiatric reports, testimonies from incredulous classmates, and police notes revealing the gaping flaws in a public safety system that had ignored warning signs for 3 long years. The media pressure became deafening, transforming Houston into the epicenter of American horror and setting the stage for one of the most complex and emotionally charged legal battles in Texas history, where the entire society would demand not only exemplary sentences, but also a profound introspection into the dysfunctions that had allowed such a monster to operate with total impunity in the heart of the city. The legal process that began following the horrific discovery of the Dean Corll mass graves proved to be one of the most harrowing and complex chapters in Texas legal history, transforming Houston courtrooms into arenas where the grief-stricken family's thirst for justice clashed with the cold reality of the surviving young accomplice's criminal responsibility. While the mastermind of the massacre had escaped earthly justice, killed by his own accomplice, society as a whole demanded accountability for that bloody decade, insisting that the truth be revealed not only about the acts committed, but also about the psychological and social mechanisms that had allowed such horror to continue with widespread indifference. Naturally, all eyes turned to David Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley, the 2 teenagers who had, to varying degrees, gotten their hands dirty with the victim's blood in exchange for a few banknotes and doses of narcotics. Their respective trials, followed with obsessive fervor by the national media and a still-shocked local population, were not simply individual criminal judgments, but a collective attempt to make sense of the incomprehensible, to quantify the unquantifiable, and to restore, at least superficially, a semblance of moral order to a community deeply traumatized by the betrayal of its own children. The wheels of justice began turning amidst palpable tension, with prosecutors working to build irrefutable cases against defense teams facing the Herculean task of representing teenagers broken by the psychological grip of a serial killer while simultaneously answering for crimes of unimaginable cruelty. David Brooks, the first to appear in court, faced formal murder charges related to the abductions and killings perpetrated under Dean Corll's roof. During the hearings, the atmosphere in the courtroom was heavy with the poignant testimonies of the victims' parents, who held up photographs of their missing sons, a stark contrast to the often detached or terrified demeanor of the accused. Brooks's defense attorneys attempted to argue total psychological subjugation, claiming that their client, only 15 years old at the start of the events, had acted under constant duress and in a state of panic at the hands of a manipulative and sadistic adult who threatened his own life if he refused to obey. However, the prosecution methodically dismantled this line of defense by highlighting Brooks's active, repeated, and paid involvement in the systematic recruitment of his victims, demonstrating that he was fully aware of the macabre purpose of the traps he set for his own schoolmates and neighbors. The confrontation of testimonies highlighted the cold, utilitarian way in which the young accomplices had traded the lives of their peers, transforming adolescent friendship into a deadly currency in the service of the predator in the Heights district. A few months later, the trial of Elmer Wayne Henley brought this legal drama to a close, taking on an even stronger symbolic dimension due to the paradoxical role he played in the tragic conclusion of the case, oscillating in the collective imagination between the status of a bloodthirsty executioner and that of an unexpected liberator. Henley was on trial for the murder of Dean Corll, whom he shot 6 times to save his own life and those of his 2 companions, but also for his direct involvement in numerous murders committed alongside the confectioner in the preceding years. Henley's defense strategy relied on the recognition of his full confession, his active cooperation with investigators, which led to the discovery of the mass graves in the warehouse, and the central argument of self-defense during the fatal altercation of August 8, 1973. The psychiatrists called to the stand by the defense painted a clinical portrait of a deeply disturbed teenager, subjected from a very young age to family instability and ensnared by a manipulative predator who had methodically destroyed his moral compass through the combined use of drugs, money, and psychological terror. Nevertheless, the prosecution forcefully and rigorously reiterated that Henley had actively and consciously participated in the ordeal of several victims at numerous key moments, sometimes even taking the initiative to hunt them down to secure the financial rewards promised by Coral. The trial thus transformed into a complex ethical and legal debate on the responsibility of youth in the face of systemic corruption and on the fragile line between victim and perpetrator in extreme criminal environments. After intense deliberations, and under the watchful eye of a public eager for closure, the verdicts delivered by the Texas juries definitively sealed the legal fate of the two young accomplices. David Brooks was found guilty of the charges against him and sentenced to life imprisonment, a harsh sentence designed to permanently isolate him from a society he had betrayed, plunging him into a prolonged incarceration that would only end half a century later with his death in custody. Elmer Wayne Henley, despite his decisive contribution to ending the massacre and his pleas emphasizing his final act of salvation, was also severely punished by the Texas justice system, receiving several consecutive life sentences for his direct involvement in the multiple murders orchestrated by Coral. The judges determined that while the act of August 8th had brought an end to the nightmare, it could not absolve the teenager of years of active complicity and the unspeakable suffering inflicted on the dozens of young boys who crossed his path. The doors of Texas prisons have thus closed on the last living participants in this tragedy, marking the end of the criminal phase of a case that had exposed the worst demons of human nature and the gaping flaws in the local public safety apparatus. For the victims' families, these convictions, while essential for establishing an official truth, could in no way erase the immeasurable pain of losing their children, leaving behind an indelible void and a lingering bitterness at the institution's failure to protect the most vulnerable long before blood flowed freely in the dark dens of Houston. The shockwave caused by the discovery of the gruesome crimes of Dean Coral and his accomplices did not dissipate with the pronouncement of the court verdicts or the closing of the prison cell doors for David Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley, for the true significance of this tragedy lies in the indelible scars it left etched into the collective consciousness of all American society and, more particularly, into the wounded memory of the city of Houston. For 3 long years, between 1970 and 1973, a predator was able to roam the sun-drenched streets of the working-class Heights neighborhood, distributing candy and deceptive smiles while orchestrating the abomination in the complicit silence of institutional indifference. The trauma of these massacres acted as a brutal revealer of the gaping flaws and willful blindness that characterized law enforcement at the time when faced with the disappearances of young teenagers from modest backgrounds. Back then, automatically classifying missing children and young men as mere runaways seeking to escape parental authority was a tragic bureaucratic shortcut, a moral abdication by institutions that effectively granted total impunity to the monsters lurking in the shadows. The revelation of the mass graves at the warehouse in South Houston, on the Bolivar Peninsula, and on the shores of Sam Rayburn Lake shattered this illusion of security, forcing authorities to fundamentally rethink their investigative protocols, the handling of missing persons reports, and the consideration given to vulnerable populations. The violent death of Coral, gunned down by his own accomplice in a surge of survival instinct, brought an end to the physical carnage, but it also ushered in a period of painful societal introspection, where the entire nation had to confront its own failure to protect its youth from domestic predators hiding behind facades of bourgeois respectability and feigned benevolence. Beyond the institutional reforms and changes in police investigative methods that stemmed from this case, the deepest and most heartbreaking impact remains that suffered by the victims' families, those mothers, fathers, and siblings who had to bear the unbearable weight of uncertainty for years before learning the horrific truth about the fate of their beloved children. For these families, the discovery of the exhumed bodies and the formal identification of the young boys brought neither solace nor redemption, but rather transformed the lingering hope of one day seeing a son alive into an eternal and irrevocable grief, marked by the gruesome details revealed during the trials. The Heights neighborhood, once a simple working-class community punctuated by children playing in the streets and by neighborly solidarity, was permanently stigmatized, transformed in the popular Texan imagination into an epicenter of horror, where the innocence of an entire generation had been methodically sacrificed on the altar of sadistic perversion. The parents had to learn to survive in a world where the familiar figure of the candy store owner, a universal symbol of childhood sweetness, had become forever synonymous with a deadly trap and the ultimate betrayal. This generational wound has been passed down invisibly, permanently altering the perception of public safety and the relationship of trust between citizens and the institutions responsible for protecting them. The accounts of these disappearances, initially suppressed by police indifference, have transformed over time into a somber and enduring lesson on the necessity of constant vigilance, reminding us that the greatest dangers do not necessarily come from the unknown lurking in the shadows, but sometimes from the one who smiles warmly at your doorstep, offering you a poisoned treat. The retrospective analysis of this extraordinary criminal case also sheds light on the disturbing complexity of human nature, particularly through the tragic paths of the young accomplices, David Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley, which terrifyingly illustrate how quickly teenagers searching for belonging and guidance can turn to the perpetrators when exposed to the destructive psychological manipulation of a perverse adult. Their personal trajectories, marked by insecurity and isolation, were skillfully exploited by Dean Corll through a toxic cocktail of easy money, drugs, and false promises of camaraderie, transforming children into instruments of mass destruction. While Henley's final act, turning the gun on his torturer on the morning of August 8, 1973, certainly broke the chain of death and saved the lives of two other innocent people, it could not erase the years of active complicity during which he himself had ensnared his own schoolmates. This moral duality haunted public and psychiatric debates throughout the following decades, raising the complex question of redemption in the face of the horror of acts committed under the influence of, or in submission to, terror. The courts ruled by upholding the demand for the maximum criminal penalty, finding that survival and partial repentance could not erase individual responsibility in a massacre of such magnitude. However, the ethical debate remained alive in the collective consciousness, a reminder that the line between victim and perpetrator can sometimes prove tragically thin in environments of systemic violence. The death of David Brooks in custody in 2020, after nearly half a century behind bars, finally closed the biographical chapter for the direct perpetrators of this tragedy, leaving behind a definitive silence that now resonates as a permanent memorial to the young lives shattered. Finally, on the scale of American criminal history, the Houston mass murders, inextricably linked to the sinister figure of Dean Corll and his macabre nickname Candyman, occupy a foundational and pivotal place, marking the transition to the modern era of criminology and media coverage of serial killers. Even before infamous figures like John Wayne Gacy or Ted Bundy became permanently etched into the national psychosis of the late 1970s, Corll's crimes had already established the most appalling standards of organized predation, the exploitation of juvenile vulnerability, and the methodical concealment of corpses on a massive scale. This case profoundly transformed how criminologists, FBI profilers, and law enforcement agencies understand the behavioral patterns of serial killers, demonstrating the crucial importance of interagency cooperation, actively listening to families, and scientific rigor in analyzing complex crime scenes. The story of this descent into hell continues to permeate popular culture, specialized documentaries, and psychological analyses, not as mere morbid entertainment, but as a solemn and timeless warning about the darkest recesses of the human psyche. By delving into this Texas tragedy, society is forced to remember the faces of those young boys from the Heights neighborhood who had asked only to live their youth in an ordinary world, but whose lives were forever shattered by the purest embodiment of absolute evil. Their names, though erased by time and suffering, continue to resonate through the decades as a silent call for vigilance, for the protection of the weakest, and for the stubborn refusal to let institutional indifference offer sanctuary to predators who prowl in the blind spots of our civilized communities. The legislative and institutional shockwaves that swept across Texas and the broader United States in the immediate wake of the August 1973 disclosures represented a profound reckoning for the criminal justice system. Before the Houston mass murders brutally exposed the fatal flaws inherent in standard police protocols, law enforcement agencies nationwide operated under a dangerously complacent set of assumptions regarding teenagers and young adults who vanished from their homes. For years, missing youth reports were routinely and reflexively dismissed, automatically filed away under the convenient, administrative label of runaways without a shred of deeper inquiry. This systemic negligence was not merely an isolated oversight. It was a devastating institutional failure that effectively provided an impenetrable protective shield to predators operating openly within working-class neighborhoods. The unmasking of Dean Corll and the horrifying discovery of 28 buried bodies shattered this willful ignorance overnight, sending shockwaves through communities across the nation. Parents everywhere realized with a sickening, visceral jolt that the institutional framework designed to safeguard their children was profoundly broken, completely blind to the silent perils lurking in local streets and entirely deaf to the desperate, repeated pleas of grieving families. This unprecedented tragedy forced an immediate, agonizing reevaluation of how missing persons cases involving minors and adolescents were documented, investigated, and prioritized at every level of government. Law enforcement leaders, municipal politicians, and child welfare advocates were compelled to confront the deeply uncomfortable truth that a teenager leaving a home did not automatically equate to a voluntary departure, and that every single unexplained disappearance demanded rigorous, immediate scrutiny rather than passive, dismissive acceptance. This watershed moment catalyzed a quiet yet sweeping revolution in investigative standards, sowing the vital early seeds for what would eventually evolve into modern national missing children databases, interagency communication networks, and highly specialized task forces dedicated to tracking down vulnerable juveniles before they could fall permanently through the cracks of a deeply flawed bureaucratic apparatus. The physical wounds inflicted upon a city can sometimes heal over the course of years as old buildings are demolished, streets are repaved, and new generations populate quiet neighborhoods, but the psychological legacy of a horror of this magnitude leaves an indelible, festering stain on the collective psyche. In the Houston Heights, the lingering shadow of the Candyman persisted for decades, transforming a once tight-knit, working-class community into a place permanently haunted by its own buried history. Families who had lived through the agonizing uncertainty of the early 1970s carried an invisible, crushing burden of survivor guilt, persistent paranoia, and a total, irreversible loss of innocence. The simple, everyday rituals of community life, children walking freely to local stores, neighbors casually chatting across front porches, the cheerful jingle of an ice cream truck or the modest sweetness of a corner candy shop, were forever poisoned by the terrifying realization of what dark depravity could easily hide behind a benevolent smile and a pocketful of free treats. The neighborhood became a living, breathing monument to an unspeakable trauma, a place where the ordinary, mundane architecture of suburban life served as a chilling, daily reminder of extraordinary cruelty. Even as decades passed and new residents moved into the area, completely unaware of the blood-soaked earth beneath their feet, the name Dean Corll remained a dark, ominous talisman in the folklore of American true crime, a cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones about the monsters who walk among us disguised as friendly, helpful neighbors. The cultural impact extended far beyond the borders of Texas, embedding itself deeply into the American consciousness as a terrifying archetype of suburban Gothic horror, proving conclusively that the most profound threats often reside not in the distant, unfamiliar shadows of a lawless wilderness, but right inside the sunlit, friendly living rooms of our own familiar streets, masked entirely by the comforting illusion of neighborly warmth and absolute community trust. Long before the advent of modern psychological profiling techniques, advanced digital forensic databases, and 24-hour true crime media ecosystems, the Houston mass murders provided a grim, agonizing masterclass in the complex mechanics of predatory grooming. Dean Corll did not rely purely on brute physical force or violent coercion to lure his vulnerable victims into his chamber of horrors. Instead, he skillfully weaponized trust, manufactured affection, and the inherent insecurities of adolescence against the young boys he targeted. He understood with chilling precision the fragile psychology of working-class teenagers who frequently felt overlooked, restless, and desperately eager for a sense of belonging, peer acceptance, or financial independence. By establishing himself in the community as a benevolent benefactor who generously handed out candy, offered casual cash, and provided a seemingly safe sanctuary from the relentless pressures of their daily lives, Coral executed a sophisticated, premeditated grooming strategy that predated modern clinical definitions of the term by many decades. The active involvement of young accomplices like David Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley added an exceptionally dark, perverted dimension to this dynamic, illustrating with crystal clarity how calculated predators could subvert peer influence to construct an invisible, impenetrable barrier of complicity and silence around their atrocities. When the full, staggering scope of these manipulative tactics was exposed during the frantic aftermath of Coral's violent death, it forced criminologists, educators, and parents to fundamentally rethink how they perceived adolescent vulnerability. The case shattered the naive, comforting assumption that children and teenagers were only ever at risk from mysterious strangers lurking in dark, unfamiliar alleys, demonstrating with brutal, undeniable clarity that the most dangerous predators are frequently those who successfully integrate themselves into the everyday fabric of the community, earning the absolute trust of their victims and the blind, uncritical eye of society through calculated acts of superficial generosity and disarming
charm.
As the decades rolled forward relentlessly into the 21st century, the direct human links to the Houston mass murders slowly dissolved into the annals of history, leaving behind only weathered police reports, courtroom transcripts, and the enduring, quiet grief of surviving families. David Brooks spent nearly 50 years confined behind the sterile, unforgiving walls of a Texas correctional facility, his entire world shrinking down to the monotonous, rigid rhythm of institutional life until his death in the year 2020, bringing a quiet, unheralded end to the existence of one of the case's most infamous central figures. Elmer Wayne Henley remained indefinitely incarcerated, carrying the heavy, inescapable psychological burden of his complex dual identity as both a broken victim of Coral's profound manipulation and an active, willing participant in an unspeakable human tragedy, serving as a living, breathing bridge to an era of terror that the state of Texas spent half a century trying to reconcile. The physical sites of the atrocities, the unassuming, modest house in the Heights, the grim, isolated warehouse in the southern outskirts of the sprawling city, underwent total transformations, scrubbed clean, demolished, or repurposed, absorbed entirely back into the mundane physical landscape of a rapidly modernizing Houston that desperately sought to outgrow its darkest historical chapter. Yet, despite the relentless march of time and the physical erasure of the architectural spaces where the crimes originally unfolded, the souls of the 28 young men and boys who vanished into the deadly orbit of the Candyman could never be truly or completely forgotten. Their names, etched permanently into the sorrowful annals of American criminal history, stand today as a solemn, unyielding reminder of lives cut tragically short before they ever truly began, representing a lost generation whose devastating fates forced a nation to open its eyes, reform its broken institutions, and confront the darkest recesses of human cruelty with unwavering vigilance, institutional accountability, and resolute moral strength. True crime, when approached at its most profound and analytical level, is never merely about the gore, the statistical tallies, or the mechanical details of an investigative file. It is a deep, unflinching exploration of the fundamental fragility of human existence and the haunting echoes left behind when the essential social contract is shattered by unimaginable malevolence. The story of Dean Coral and the Houston mass murders remains permanently etched as one of the darkest chapters in the history of crime precisely because it forces humanity to confront the terrifying ease with which absolute evil can disguise itself in the ordinary, comforting trappings of daily life. It is a narrative defined not just by the monstrous acts committed within the locked confines of a torture chamber, but by the systemic failures, the societal blind spots, and the profound, lingering human cost borne by families who were left to wander a labyrinth of agonizing silence and uncertainty. When we look back across the decades at the sun-drenched streets of 1970s Houston, at the working-class boys who walked willingly toward a fatal trap disguised as friendship, we are reminded with sobering force that safety is never an absolute guarantee and that vigilance is an eternal, non-negotiable obligation. The legacy of the Candyman is not simply a historical record of unspeakable brutality, but a permanent, jagged scar on the collective human conscience, a haunting testament to the quiet resilience of those who survived, the sudden, desperate courage of a young boy who finally pulled a trigger to end a relentless nightmare, and the sacred duty of a civilized society to protect its most vulnerable members from the silent shadows that wait patiently just beyond the edge of awareness. As the echoes of those tragic years continue to fade slowly into the vast expanse of time, the memory of the 28 boys serves as an eternal sentinel, guarding vigilantly against complacency and reminding us forever of the razor-thin boundary that separates the warm light of community from the deep, dark abyss. When the final echoes of the judicial proceedings faded into the quiet corridors of the Texas correctional system, the true weight of the Houston mass murders settled permanently over the collective memory of the nation. This was not merely an isolated outburst of criminal violence or a bizarre anomaly of a turbulent era. It was a watershed moment that irrevocably transformed how American society understood the dark intersections of predation, institutional neglect, and adolescent vulnerability. Before the events of August 1973 shattered the illusion of safety in the Heights, the concept of a serial killer operating with such methodical organization in a bustling, working-class urban neighborhood was largely unimaginable to the general public. The case forced a brutal awakening, stripping away the comforting domestic myths that protected communities from acknowledging the rot that could silently fester behind closed doors. It established a chilling new benchmark for mass violence, proving that the most lethal threats were not always foreign or hidden in the wild frontiers, but could be woven seamlessly into the very fabric of daily civic life, wearing the benign mask of a friendly neighbor and distributing sweetness to the unsuspecting young souls who crossed his path. The psychological aftermath for the city of Houston was profound, creating deep fractures in the social confidence of local neighborhoods that took generations to heal. Families who had spent anxious years searching for missing sons were suddenly forced to confront the grim reality of their children's final moments, transforming hope into a permanent, agonizing state of mourning. The physical environment itself became stigmatized, as ordinary street corners, local candy shops, and quiet residential lanes were forever shadowed by the memory of the horrors that had occurred in secret. Parents grew hypervigilant, altering the traditional freedoms of childhood and adolescence as the unspoken social contract between neighbors was fundamentally rewritten. People began to look at the quiet, soft-spoken individuals living next door with a newfound sense of caution and suspicion, realizing that outward charm and community generosity could easily serve as calculated camouflage for unimaginable darkness. This cultural shift extended far beyond Texas, resonating across the United States as a chilling reminder that the spaces where children played and grew could harbor catastrophic dangers if institutional apathy and social isolation were allowed to run unchecked in the shadows of modern urban growth. Within the sphere of law enforcement, the fallout from the Candyman investigation served as a bitter catalyst for much-needed systemic reform. The disastrous tendency of police departments during the early 1970s to dismiss missing teenagers as simple runaways was exposed as a fatal administrative flaw that actively enabled serial predators to continue their work without interruption. Investigators across the country began to realize that missing person reports involving youth required immediate, thorough interagency cooperation and rigorous scientific tracking rather than dismissive assumptions. The discovery of the mass graves in Houston forced police agencies to reevaluate how they collected evidence, interviewed witnesses, and connected disparate geographical disappearances into cohesive investigative patterns. This institutional awakening laid critical groundwork for the modernization of missing children databases and specialized investigative task forces designed to protect vulnerable youth before they fell victim to predatory grooming. The tragedy demonstrated unequivocally that law enforcement must always approach every unexplained disappearance with absolute diligence, treating every missing child as a matter of highest priority rather than an administrative nuisance to be filed away and forgotten in the bureaucratic archives of an indifferent municipal system. At the core of this dark historical chapter remain the 28 young men and boys whose lives were brutally cut short by Dean Corll and his accomplices. In the morbid fascination often generated by true crime narratives, it is critically important to look past the grim statistics and focus squarely on the individual humanity of each victim. These were not merely names on a police report or entries in a forensic ledger. They were sons, brothers, and friends with distinct hopes, dreams, and futures that were stolen away in their prime. They came from working-class families who struggled daily to make ends meet, placing their trust in a community that ultimately failed to protect them from the monsters lurking in plain sight. The enduring memory of these young victims serves as a sacred reminder of the fragility of youth and the profound responsibility society holds to shield the vulnerable from harm. Their tragic fates forced a permanent reckoning in the American conscience, ensuring that their names would forever be remembered not just as symbols of unspeakable tragedy, but as enduring testaments to the urgent need for vigilance, compassion, and unwavering moral integrity in the face of hidden cruelty. The role of true crime storytelling in examining cases like the Houston mass murders extends far beyond sensationalism, offering a profound space for analytical reflection and historical education. By meticulously exploring the mechanics of how Dean Corll exploited adolescent insecurities through manufactured generosity and psychological grooming, modern commentators provide invaluable insights into the warning signs of predatory behavior. This case demonstrates that grooming rarely begins with overt hostility. Instead, it often wears the appealing guise of friendship, financial assistance, and unconditional acceptance, making it uniquely dangerous to restless teenagers seeking autonomy and connection. Analyzing these patterns helps educators, parents, and community leaders recognize subtle behavioral shifts and environmental vulnerabilities before they escalate into irreversible tragedy. True crime, when approached with empathy and intellectual rigor, acts as an essential mirror reflecting both the darkest depths of human depravity and the resilient capacity of society to learn from its past failures, adapt its protective frameworks, and honor the memory of those who were lost by striving relentlessly to prevent future atrocities. The complex psychological burden carried by the secondary figures in this tragedy, most notably the young accomplices David Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley, illustrates the harrowing moral ambiguity that can arise when vulnerable youths are ensnared by a master manipulator. Neither teenager started their journey as a cold-blooded killer. Rather, they were systematically compromised, desensitized, and trapped in an inescapable web of fear, financial dependence, and shared guilt by Dean Corll. While Henley's desperate, courageous act on that August morning broke the cycle of violence and saved innocent lives, it could not erase the dark reality of his prior complicity in trapping his peers. Their subsequent decades behind bars served as grim monuments to the devastating consequences of moral corruption under extreme psychological coercion. The legal and ethical debates surrounding their trials challenged the judicial system to weigh individual accountability against the profound impacts of predatory manipulation on developing minds. Ultimately, their long incarcerations closed the final chapters on the active participants of the Houston mass murders, leaving behind a sobering reminder of how easily the innocent can be twisted into agents of destruction when evil operates unchecked within a community. The physical geography of the crimes underwent a total transformation over the subsequent decades, as the modest houses and isolated warehouses associated with Dean Corll were demolished, scrubbed clean, or repurposed to erase their grim association. Yet despite the relentless efforts of urban development and the passage of time to bury the physical evidence of the atrocities, the phantom footprint of the Candyman remained permanently etched into the cultural folklore of Texas. New residents moved into the Houston Heights, often completely unaware of the blood-soaked earth beneath their feet, walking modern suburban streets where unimaginable horrors once transpired in absolute silence. This geographical erasure highlights a universal truth about dark historical events. While buildings can be torn down and land can be redeveloped, the intangible memories and cultural scars left behind by systemic violence endure as permanent warnings. The story transitioned from front-page news headlines into urban legend, becoming a cautionary tale whispered across generations about the terrifying reality that monsters do not always wait in dark alleys, but can instead blend seamlessly into the sunlit, ordinary fabric of everyday neighborhood life. As we reflect upon the vast expanse of this harrowing true crime narrative, we are forced to confront the fundamental fragility of human existence and the eternal vigilance required to safeguard our communities against hidden malevolence. The legacy of Dean Corll and the Houston mass murders is not merely a chronicle of unmitigated cruelty, but a solemn reminder that safety is never an absolute guarantee, and that the sacred social contract binding neighbors together can be shatteringly disrupted by individuals who choose to weaponize trust. The 28 young men whose lives were so tragically extinguished remain our silent sentinels, standing watch across the decades as a poignant symbol of lost potential and a testament to the absolute necessity of institutional accountability, parental attentiveness, and moral courage. Their stories demand that we never again turn a blind eye to the vulnerable or dismiss the desperate pleas of families seeking answers in the darkest hours of uncertainty. In remembering them, we honor their humanity, defy the silencing darkness of the past, and pledge ourselves to an unwavering commitment of protection, empathy, and truth. The echoes of that fateful morning in August 1973 will forever reverberate through the annals of American history, serving as an unyielding guardian of our collective conscience and a permanent beacon calling us toward a safer, more vigilant world where such unspeakable horrors can never find sanctuary again within the ordinary streets we call our home. This enduring vigilance remains our most solemn obligation. Let us ensure that their sacrifice is never forgotten, that our institutions remain eternally accountable, and that the shadows of indifference are forever illuminated by the enduring light of justice and human compassion for all safe future generations to come. As the decades stretch onward, carrying contemporary society further and further away from the sweltering summer of 1973, the dark legacy of the Houston mass murders evolves from a raw, bleeding wound of local history into an enduring monument of caution within the American consciousness. The passage of time possesses a unique ability to soften the sharpest edges of tragedy, transforming visceral horror into distant folklore, yet some atrocities are so fundamentally disruptive to the moral fabric of a civilization that they refuse to be buried beneath the sands of forgetfulness. The name Dean Corll, once whispered in absolute terror across the working-class streets of the Houston Heights, remains a grim lodestar in the study of criminal pathology, representing the terrifying archetype of the domestic predator who exploits the absolute best of human community spirit to fuel the worst of human depravity. In examining this complex historical tapestry, modern observers are compelled to look beyond sensationalized headlines, stripping away morbid curiosity to confront deeper, more uncomfortable truths about the fragility of social trust and the fatal blind spots of institutional vigilance that allowed such an unfathomable nightmare to persist unchecked for 3 agonizing years. The transformation of law enforcement standards in the wake of the Candyman case stands as one of the few redemptive outcomes born from total devastation. Prior to the unearthing of the mass graves, police agencies operated under a framework of bureaucratic convenience, casually dismissing the desperate pleas of parents and systematically categorizing missing teenagers as voluntary runaways. This catastrophic failure of imagination and duty essentially granted serial predators a silent, unhindered sanctuary within plain sight. The harrowing revelations of August 1973 forced a radical, long-overdue modernization of investigative protocols across the United States. Modern missing persons divisions, advanced forensic databases, interagency communication networks, and specialized child protection task forces all trace their philosophical roots back to the systemic shockwaves generated by the Houston tragedy. Law enforcement leadership learned the agonizing lesson that every unexplained disappearance of a youth demands immediate, aggressive, and unyielding scrutiny rather than passive administrative neglect. This institutional awakening ensured that future generations of vulnerable teenagers would benefit from a protective apparatus vastly superior to the broken safety nets of the 1970s, turning the painful lessons learned from the lives lost into a permanent shield against future predators. Yet, no amount of institutional reform or procedural advancement can ever truly compensate for the profound, irreplaceable human cost borne by the families of the 28 victims. For the mothers, fathers, sisters, and brothers who walked through the dark labyrinth of uncertainty and grief, the official closure provided by court verdicts and exhumed evidence brought no true peace, only the definitive confirmation of their worst nightmares. The quiet neighborhoods of the Heights, once characterized by the innocent laughter of children and the simple bonds of working-class solidarity, were permanently shadowed by the knowledge of what had transpired behind closed doors. The traditional freedoms of childhood and adolescence were quietly rewritten as parents grew hypervigilant, realizing that the comforting illusion of neighborly warmth could occasionally mask unfathomable malice. The emotional scars carried by these families became a silent inheritance, a testament to a grief so profound and absolute that it defies easy articulation. In honoring their memory, society is called upon to recognize that behind every statistical tally in a criminal ledger lies a unique human life, a constellation of hopes, dreams, and potential that was violently extinguished before its time, leaving an eternal void in the hearts of those who loved them. The mechanics of the crimes committed by Dean Corll offer a chilling masterclass in the insidious nature of predatory grooming, long before contemporary psychology fully defined the concept. Corll did not rely exclusively on violence or brute force. Instead, he weaponized generosity, manufactured affection, and the universal adolescent desire for autonomy and belonging. By positioning himself as a benevolent benefactor who distributed free candy, offered casual cash, and provided a seemingly safe harbor from the relentless pressures of working-class life, he masterfully dismantled the natural defense mechanisms of his victims. The complicity of young accomplices like David Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley further demonstrated how predators can subvert peer influence, turning friendship into a lethal currency. This complex dynamic challenges simple binaries of good and evil, forcing criminologists and psychologists to examine how vulnerable youths can be systematically manipulated, desensitized, and trapped in webs of shared guilt. Understanding these psychological pathways is essential for educators, parents, and community leaders today, as it highlights the subtle warning signs of predatory manipulation that often hide beneath the veneer of charm, generosity, and community integration. Over the decades, the physical geography of the Houston mass murders underwent a relentless process of erasure and renewal. The modest houses, the quiet streets, and the grim warehouses associated with the crimes were eventually demolished, scrubbed clean, or completely redeveloped, absorbed back into the sprawling, modern architecture of a rapidly expanding Texan metropolis. Urban planners and local authorities sought to bury the physical evidence, hoping to distance the community from its blood-soaked past and allow the scarred landscape to heal. Yet, as history repeatedly demonstrates, while physical structures can be torn down and land can be repurposed, intangible cultural memories and collective scars stubbornly endure. The story of the Candyman transcended its local origins to become a permanent fixture in American true crime folklore, serving as a cautionary tale passed down through generations. This geographical erasure, coupled with cultural permanence, underscores the reality that dark historical events leave behind an indelible phantom footprint, a silent reminder that the earth beneath our feet holds stories of human resilience and tragedy that outlive the buildings standing upon them. Engaging with true crime narratives of this magnitude requires a delicate balance between historical inquiry and profound ethical reflection, ensuring that the exploration of dark subjects transcends mere sensationalism. When approached with genuine empathy and intellectual rigor, the study of such atrocities acts as a vital mirror reflecting both the darkest abysses of human depravity and the remarkable resilience of communities striving to learn from their collective failures. It reminds us that civilization is built upon a delicate social contract of mutual trust, a contract that is uniquely vulnerable to individuals who choose to exploit the good faith of others for malicious ends. The Houston mass murders challenge us to confront uncomfortable truths about isolation, economic vulnerability, and the hidden struggles of youth who feel invisible in their own neighborhoods. By maintaining an unflinching focus on the humanity of the victims and the systemic lessons of the investigation, storytelling transforms from a recounting of horror into an act of remembrance and a call to moral vigilance, ensuring that the past is neither exploited for entertainment nor forgotten in the rush of time. As the final chapters of the human actors in this tragedy close, marked by the passage of time, the aging of survivors, and the eventual deaths of those imprisoned. The narrative transitions into an enduring legacy of moral responsibility. The young boy who made the desperate, split-second decision to pick up a weapon and end a reign of terror carried an impossible psychological burden for the rest of his days, symbolizing the tragic blurring of boundaries in environments of extreme victimization. His actions saved lives on that August morning, yet they also sealed his fate within a complex web of legal and moral accountability. The judicial system ultimately enforced its rigid demands, yet the philosophical debate surrounding coercion, youthful culpability, and redemption persists in the background of criminological study. This legacy challenges us to look beyond simplistic judgments and recognize the profound complexities of human behavior under duress, reminding us that society bears a collective duty to intervene long before despair drives young minds into the orbits of lethal predators. In the final analysis, the shadow cast by the Houston mass murders and the grim moniker of the Candyman serves as an eternal sentinel guarding against complacency in our modern world. The 28 young men and boys who vanished into the dark orbit of Dean Corll remain our silent guides, their collective memory urging us never to turn a blind eye to the vulnerable or dismiss the quiet cries of families searching for lost loved ones. Safety is never an absolute guarantee, and the preservation of our communities requires an active, unyielding commitment to empathy, institutional accountability, and moral courage. As the echoes of those tragic years continue to recede into the vast expanse of history, the lessons forged in the crucible of 1970s Houston stand as an unyielding beacon, calling us toward a future where our streets are safe, our children are fiercely protected, and the dark predators who lurk in the margins can find no sanctuary anywhere within the civilized world we share. As this comprehensive chronicle of the Houston mass murders draws to its solemn and inevitable close, we find ourselves standing at the intersection of history, memory, and profound human sorrow. The narrative journey that began in the sun-drenched, working-class streets of the Houston Heights during the early 1970s has taken us through the darkest corridors of human depravity, systemic institutional failure, and the harrowing mechanics of predatory grooming. Yet, when all the judicial proceedings have concluded, when the prison doors have locked away the surviving accomplices for the remainder of their natural lives, and when the physical spaces of the atrocities have been scrubbed clean and absorbed back into the modern urban landscape, we are left with a quiet, lingering space that demands deep intellectual and emotional reflection. True crime, at its highest and most ethical level, is never merely an exercise in recounting morbidity or cataloging statistical horrors. It is an unyielding mirror held up to society, forcing us to examine the delicate, often fragile social contracts that bind our communities together and protect our most vulnerable members from the hidden predators who roam the margins of our daily lives. The legacy of Dean Corll, the man known infamously to history as the Candyman, remains a dark and ominous landmark in the evolution of American criminology. Before his reign of terror was abruptly shattered on that fateful August morning in 1973, the general public and local law enforcement agencies operated under a dangerous blanket of naivety, assuming that monstrous acts of mass violence required a cinematic backdrop of shadowy, lawless wilderness, or distant foreign threats. The case shattered this comforting illusion with brutal finality, demonstrating that the most lethal dangers could wear the benign, smiling mask of a friendly neighborhood benefactor, distributing sweets and offering casual cash to restless teenagers seeking connection and autonomy. The psychological sophistication of Corll's grooming methods, weaponizing generosity, manufactured affection, and adolescent insecurities predated modern clinical definitions by decades, providing a chilling masterclass in how malignant personalities manipulate social trust to create an invisible, impenetrable shield of isolation and secrecy around their victims. Equally central to the tragedy was the catastrophic failure of institutional oversight that allowed 28 young men and boys to vanish into the void over a span of 3 agonizing years without triggering a coordinated, aggressive police response. The bureaucratic laziness that reflexively categorized missing youths as voluntary runaways was not just an administrative oversight. It was a profound moral abandonment of duty that effectively granted a serial predator unhindered sanctuary in plain sight. The unearthing of the mass graves in the southern warehouse, along the distant shores of the Bolivar Peninsula and across the broom-laden banks of Lake Sam Rayburn, forced a violent and overdue awakening across the American law enforcement apparatus. It catalyzed the modernization of missing persons protocols, interagency communication networks, and specialized child protection task forces, ensuring that future generations of vulnerable adolescents would never again be abandoned to the indifference of a broken bureaucratic system. The painful lessons learned from the lives lost in Houston transformed the way modern society approaches the silent perils lurking in local communities, turning collective grief into a permanent shield of vigilance and accountability. Yet, amid the systemic reforms, the forensic advancements, and the historical analyses, we must never lose sight of the individual human beings whose lives were so unjustly and brutally extinguished. The 28 young men and boys who walked willingly across the threshold of Coral's home were not merely data points in a criminal ledger or transient shadows in a police report. They were sons, brothers, and friends with distinct hopes, untamed potentials, and futures that were stolen away in the prime of their youth. They came from hard-working families who trusted their community to keep them safe, only to face an unspeakable nightmare born from the intersection of predatory malice and societal neglect. The eternal memory of these young victims stands as a sacred, unyielding reminder of the profound responsibility society holds to shield the vulnerable from harm. Their tragic fates demand that we honor their humanity, defy the silencing darkness of the past, and pledge ourselves to an unwavering commitment of empathy, protection, and truth, ensuring that their names are never forgotten and their stories continue to serve as a beacon calling us toward a safer, more compassionate world. The complex psychological landscape inhabited by the secondary figures in this dark chapter, most notably David Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley, serves as a permanent reminder of the harrowing moral ambiguities that arise when vulnerable youths are ensnared by a master manipulator. Neither teenager began their journey as a cold-blooded killer. Rather, they were systematically compromised, desensitized, and trapped in an inescapable web of fear, financial dependence, and shared guilt. While Henley's desperate, courageous act of survival on that August morning broke the cycle of violence and saved innocent lives, it could not erase the dark reality of his prior complicity in trapping his peers. Their decades behind bars stand as grim monuments to the devastating consequences of moral corruption under extreme psychological coercion, challenging the judicial system to weigh individual accountability against the profound impacts of predatory manipulation on developing minds. Their long incarcerations eventually closed the active biographical chapters of the human actors in this tragedy, leaving behind a sobering legacy that illustrates how easily the innocent can be twisted into agents of destruction when evil operates unchecked within an isolated community. As the decades roll forward and contemporary society moves further away from the sweltering summer of 1973, the physical geography of the crimes undergoes its own relentless process of erasure and renewal. The modest houses, the quiet residential lanes, and the grim warehouses associated with Dean Coral have long since been demolished, scrubbed clean, or completely redeveloped, absorbed back into the sprawling, modern architecture of a rapidly expanding Texan metropolis. Urban planners and local authorities sought to bury the physical evidence, hoping to distance the community from its blood-soaked past and allow the scarred landscape to heal from its generational trauma. Yet, as history repeatedly demonstrates, while physical structures can be torn down and land can be repurposed, intangible cultural memories and collective scars stubbornly endure. The story of the Candyman transcended its local origins to become a permanent fixture in American true crime folklore, serving as a cautionary tale passed down through generations. This geographical erasure, coupled with cultural permanence, underscores the reality that dark historical events leave behind an indelible phantom footprint, a silent reminder that the earth beneath our feet holds stories of human resilience and tragedy that outlive the buildings standing upon them. Engaging with true crime narratives of this staggering magnitude requires a delicate, unwavering balance between historical inquiry and profound ethical reflection, ensuring that the exploration of dark subjects transcends mere sensationalism and becomes an act of intellectual and moral responsibility. When approached with genuine empathy and analytical rigor, the study of such atrocities acts as a vital mirror reflecting both the darkest abysses of human depravity and the remarkable resilience of communities striving to learn from their collective failures. It reminds us that civilization is built upon a delicate social contract of mutual trust, a contract that is uniquely vulnerable to individuals who choose to exploit the good faith of others for malicious ends. The Houston mass murders challenge us to confront uncomfortable truths about economic vulnerability, adolescent isolation, and the hidden struggles of youth who feel invisible in their own neighborhoods. By maintaining an unflinching focus on the humanity of the victims and the systemic lessons of the investigation, storytelling transforms from a recounting of horror into an act of remembrance and a call to moral vigilance, ensuring that the past is neither exploited for entertainment nor forgotten in the rush of time. In the final analysis, the shadow cast by the Houston mass murders and the grim moniker of the Candyman serves as an eternal sentinel guarding against complacency in our modern world. The 28 young men and boys who vanished into the dark orbit of Dean Corll remain our silent guides, their collective memory urging us never to turn a blind eye to the vulnerable or dismiss the quiet cries of families searching for lost loved ones. Safety is never an absolute guarantee, and the preservation of our communities requires an active, unyielding commitment to empathy, institutional accountability, and moral courage. As the echoes of those tragic years continue to recede into the vast expanse of history, the lessons forged in the crucible of 1970's Houston stand as an unyielding beacon, calling us toward a future where our streets are safe, our children are fiercely protected, and the dark predators who lurk in the margins can find no sanctuary anywhere within the civilized world we share. This enduring vigilance remains our most solemn obligation. Let us ensure that their sacrifice is never forgotten, that our institutions remain eternally accountable, and that the shadows of indifference are forever illuminated by the enduring light of justice and human compassion for all safe future generations to come, closing this extensive chronicle with a profound commitment to remembrance, protection, and the relentless pursuit of truth across every corner of our shared human experience. As we arrive at this final and definitive movement of our deep exploration into the Houston mass murders, we cross the threshold from historical reconstruction into the realm of timeless collective memory. The journey that began in the sun-drenched, working-class neighborhoods of 1970s Houston has forced us to navigate the darkest, most labyrinthine corridors of human cruelty, institutional negligence, and psychological manipulation. Yet, as the echoes of the courtroom gavels fade into silence and the physical spaces of a tragedy are completely swallowed by the relentless expansion of modern urban life, we are left standing in a profound, contemplative space. True crime, when approached with the highest standards of intellectual rigor, empathy, and respect, transcends the boundaries of morbid curiosity. It becomes an unflinching examination of the fragile bonds that constitute our social fabric, a solemn reminder that civilization rests upon a delicate foundation of trust, mutual care, and eternal vigilance against the unseen predators who wait patiently in the margins of our daily existence. The legacy of Dean Corll, the man who manipulated the innocent moniker of the Candyman to mask an unimaginable capacity for violence, remains a dark and towering landmark in the history of American criminology. Before the shocking events of August 1973 exposed the rot hidden beneath the surface of the Houston Heights, society operated under a dangerously complacent illusion. There was a comforting, albeit naive, assumption that extreme serial violence required a theatrical backdrop of lawless frontiers, dark urban alleys, or distant, unfamiliar territories. The crimes of Corll shattered this illusion with a brutal, undeniable finality, demonstrating that the most lethal threats can wear the disarming, smiling mask of a friendly neighbor, distributing sweets and offering casual cash to restless teenagers seeking connection and autonomy. The sophisticated grooming techniques he employed, weaponizing generosity, manufactured affection, and adolescent insecurities predated modern clinical definitions by decades, providing a chilling masterclass in how malignant personalities exploit community trust to build an invisible, impenetrable shield of isolation and secrecy around their victims. Equally central to the historical narrative is the catastrophic failure of institutional oversight that allowed 28 young men and boys to vanish into the void over a span of 3 agonizing years without triggering a coordinated, aggressive police response. The bureaucratic laziness that reflexively categorized missing youths as voluntary runaways was not merely an administrative oversight. It was a profound moral abandonment of duty that effectively granted a serial predator unhindered sanctuary in plain sight. The unearthing of the mass graves in the southern warehouse, along the distant shores of the Bolivar Peninsula, and across the broom-laden banks of Lake Sam Rayburn, forced a violent and overdue awakening across the American law enforcement apparatus. It catalyzed the modernization of missing persons protocols, interagency communication networks, and specialized child protection task forces, ensuring that future generations of vulnerable adolescents would never again be abandoned to the indifference of a broken bureaucratic system. The painful lessons learned from the lives lost in Houston transformed the way modern society approaches the silent perils lurking in local communities, turning collective grief into a permanent shield of vigilance and accountability. Yet, amid the systemic reforms, the forensic advancements, and the historical analyses, we must never lose sight of the individual human beings whose lives were so unjustly and brutally extinguished. The 28 young men and boys who walked willingly across the threshold of Coral's home were not merely data points in a criminal ledger or transient shadows in a police report. They were sons, brothers, and friends with distinct hopes, untamed potentials, and futures that were stolen away in the prime of their youth. They came from hard-working families who trusted their community to keep them safe, only to face an unspeakable nightmare born from the intersection of predatory malice and societal neglect. The eternal memory of these young victims stands as a sacred, unyielding reminder of the profound responsibility society holds to shield the vulnerable from harm. Their tragic fates demand that we honor their humanity, defy the silencing darkness of the past, and pledge ourselves to an unwavering commitment of empathy, protection, and truth, ensuring that their names are never forgotten and their stories continue to serve as a beacon calling us toward a safer, more compassionate world. The complex psychological landscape inhabited by the secondary figures in this dark chapter, most notably David Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley, serves as a permanent reminder of the harrowing moral ambiguities that arise when vulnerable youths are ensnared by a master manipulator. Neither teenager began their journey as a cold-blooded killer. Rather, they were systematically compromised, desensitized, and trapped in an inescapable web of fear, financial dependence, and shared guilt. While Henley's desperate, courageous act of survival on that August morning broke the cycle of violence and saved innocent lives, it could not erase the dark reality of his prior complicity in trapping his peers. Their decades behind bars stand as grim monuments to the devastating consequences of moral corruption under extreme psychological coercion, challenging the judicial system to weigh individual accountability against the profound impacts of predatory manipulation on developing minds. Their long incarcerations eventually closed the active biographical chapters of the human actors in this tragedy, leaving behind a sobering legacy that illustrates how easily the innocent can be twisted into agents of destruction when evil operates unchecked within an isolated community. As the decades roll forward and contemporary society moves further away from the sweltering summer of 1973, the physical geography of the crimes undergoes its own relentless process of erasure and renewal. The modest houses, the quiet residential lanes, and the grim warehouses associated with Dean Coral have long since been demolished, scrubbed clean, or completely redeveloped, absorbed back into the sprawling, modern architecture of a rapidly expanding Texan metropolis. Urban planners and local authorities sought to bury the physical evidence, hoping to distance the community from its blood-soaked past and allow the scarred landscape to heal from its generational trauma. Yet, as history repeatedly demonstrates, while physical structures can be torn down and land can be repurposed, intangible cultural memories and collective scars stubbornly endure. The story of the Candyman transcended its local origins to become a permanent fixture in American true crime folklore, serving as a cautionary tale passed down through generations. This geographical erasure, coupled with cultural permanence, underscores the reality that dark historical events leave behind an indelible phantom footprint, a silent reminder that the earth beneath our feet holds stories of human resilience and tragedy that outlive the buildings standing upon them. Engaging with true crime narratives of this staggering magnitude requires a delicate, unwavering balance between historical inquiry and profound ethical reflection, ensuring that the exploration of dark subjects transcends mere sensationalism and becomes an act of intellectual and moral responsibility. When approached with genuine empathy and analytical rigor, the study of such atrocities acts as a vital mirror reflecting both the darkest abysses of human depravity and the remarkable resilience of communities striving to learn from their collective failures. It reminds us that civilization is built upon a delicate social contract of mutual trust, a contract that is uniquely vulnerable to individuals who choose to exploit the good faith of others for malicious ends. The Houston mass murders challenge us to confront uncomfortable truths about economic vulnerability, adolescent isolation, and the hidden struggles of youth who feel invisible in their own neighborhoods. By maintaining an unflinching focus on the humanity of the victims and the systemic lessons of the investigation, storytelling transforms from a recounting of horror into an act of remembrance and a call to moral vigilance, ensuring that the past is neither exploited for entertainment nor forgotten in the rush of time. In the final analysis, the shadow cast by the Houston mass murders and the grim moniker of the Candyman serves as an eternal sentinel guarding against complacency in our modern world. The 28 young men and boys who vanished into the dark orbit of Dean Corll remain our silent guides, their collective memory urging us never to turn a blind eye to the vulnerable or dismiss the quiet cries of families searching for lost loved ones. Safety is never an absolute guarantee, and the preservation of our communities requires an active, unyielding commitment to empathy, institutional accountability, and moral courage. As the echoes of those tragic years continue to recede into the vast expanse of history, the lessons forged in the crucible of 1970s Houston stand as an unyielding beacon, calling us toward a future where our streets are safe, our children are fiercely protected, and the dark predators who lurk in the margins can find no sanctuary anywhere within the civilized world we share. This enduring vigilance remains our most solemn obligation. Let us ensure that their sacrifice is never forgotten, that our institutions remain eternally accountable, and that the shadows of indifference are forever illuminated by the enduring light of justice and human compassion for all safe future generations to come, closing this extensive chronicle with a profound commitment to remembrance, protection, and the relentless pursuit of truth across every corner of our shared human experience. As the long shadows of history lengthen across the landscape of American true crime, the narrative of the Houston mass murders remains an eternal benchmark of caution, sorrow, and profound moral reflection. When we trace the path from the sun-drenched, working-class streets of the 1970s Houston Heights to the modern era of sophisticated forensic profiling and digital interconnectivity, we are confronted by the stark reality of how much has changed and, simultaneously, how much remains fundamentally fragile in our approach to community safety. The tragedy of Dean Corll and his young accomplices forced a radical reckoning within law enforcement and public consciousness, stripping away the comforting denial that allowed such monstrous atrocities to unfold in plain sight. It taught a generation of investigators, criminologists, and citizens alike that evil rarely wears a terrifying, alien face. Instead, it often hides behind the familiar, reassuring facade of a local benefactor, a neighbor who smiles warmly, hands out candy to children, and integrates seamlessly into the daily rhythm of civic life. This fundamental realization transformed the very DNA of how society perceives adolescent vulnerability, shifting the paradigm from passive neglect to active, vigilant protection. Yet, beneath the broad institutional reforms and the analytical dissection of predatory grooming techniques lies an enduring human cost that can never be fully quantified or resolved by policy changes alone. The The 28 young men and boys whose lives were so violently cut short remain the true focal point of this dark historical chapter, demanding that we look past the sensationalism often associated with true crime media and confront the pure, unadulterated humanity of each individual victim. These were not merely statistical entries in a forgotten police ledger or dramatic plot points in a macabre narrative. They were sons with futures waiting to be lived, brothers who shared quiet moments in modest homes, and friends whose sudden, unexplained disappearances tore deep, irreparable holes into the fabric of their families. The grief borne by those parents and siblings did not dissipate with the closure of courtroom trials or the passage of decades. It evolved into a quiet, permanent endurance, a daily reminder of an empty chair at the dinner table and a promise unfulfilled. In honoring their memory, we are charged with the sacred duty of ensuring that their stories serve not as mere entertainment, but as an eternal vigil against the forces of indifference and cruelty that seek to exploit the invisible margins of our society. The role of true crime storytelling itself undergoes a profound metamorphosis when applied to an atrocity of this magnitude, shifting from a chronicle of horror to an exercise in ethical remembrance and deep historical critique. Ethical true crime requires an unwavering commitment to dignity, ensuring that the focus remains steadfastly fixed on the victims, the systemic failures that enabled their exploitation, and the psychological mechanisms of manipulation that trapped young minds in webs of shared guilt and terror. When storytellers approach these dark subjects with rigorous empathy and intellectual honesty, they transform history into a mirror, compelling society to examine its own blind spots, economic vulnerabilities, and social isolation. The Houston case challenges us to look closely at the youth who feel overlooked, restless, and desperate for a sense of belonging, recognizing that predatory grooming thrives precisely in the spaces where institutional safety nets fail and community connection breaks down. By maintaining this critical perspective, narrative exploration becomes an act of defiance against the silence that initially protected the perpetrator, shining a perpetual light into the dark corners where exploitation attempts to take root. As we look back across the vast expanse of time separating our modern world from that fateful summer of 1973, the physical environment of the crimes has undergone its own inevitable cycle of erasure and renewal. The quiet residential streets, the modest houses, and the grim warehouses that once whispered secrets of unimaginable horror have long since been demolished, scrubbed clean, or redeveloped, absorbed entirely into the sprawling, dynamic architecture of a modern Texan metropolis. Local authorities and urban planners sought to bury the physical evidence, hoping to distance the community from its blood-soaked past and allow the scarred landscape to heal from generational trauma. Yet, as history continually proves, while physical structures can be dismantled and land can be repurposed, intangible cultural memories and collective scars stubbornly endure. The legend of the Candyman transcended its local origins to become a permanent fixture in American folklore, serving as a haunting cautionary tale passed down through generations. This geographical erasure, coupled with cultural permanence, underscores the reality that dark historical events leave behind an indelible phantom footprint, a silent reminder that the earth beneath our feet holds stories of human resilience and tragedy that outlive the very buildings standing upon them. The complex psychological legacy left by the secondary figures in this tragedy, most notably David Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley, serves as a permanent reminder of the harrowing moral ambiguities that emerge when vulnerable youth are ensnared by a master manipulator. Neither teenager began their journey as a cold-blooded killer. Rather, they were systematically compromised, desensitized, and trapped in an inescapable web of fear, financial dependence, and shared guilt. While Henley's desperate, courageous act of survival on that August morning broke the cycle of violence and saved innocent lives, it could not erase the dark reality of his prior complicity in trapping his peers. Their decades behind bars stand as grim monuments to the devastating consequences of moral corruption under extreme psychological coercion, challenging the judicial system to weigh individual accountability against the profound impacts of predatory manipulation on developing minds. Their long incarcerations eventually closed the active biographical chapters of the human actors in this tragedy, leaving behind a sobering legacy that illustrates how easily the innocent can be twisted into agents of destruction when evil operates unchecked within an isolated community. In evaluating the broader trajectory of American criminal history, the Houston mass murders occupy a foundational and harrowing space that bridges the gap between mid-century localized crime and the modern era of federal profiling, interagency cooperation, and national missing children databases. Before the names of subsequent serial predators entered the national psychosis, the crimes committed by Dean Corll established the most terrifying standards of organized predation and systemic concealment. The failure of local authorities to connect the dots of missing youths in a single geographic area exposed the dangerous vulnerabilities of decentralized, apathetic policing models, ultimately forcing a revolution in how law enforcement agencies across the country handle endangered minors. This systemic evolution stands as a testament to the fact that monumental progress is frequently forged in the crucible of unimaginable tragedy, born from the desperate demands of grieving families who refuse to let their children be forgotten by the bureaucratic machinery of the state. The legacy of these institutional reforms ensures that the sacrifices of the victims continue to protect countless young lives every single day, turning a history of profound failure into an enduring framework of modern protection. True crime podcasting and investigative storytelling carry an immense responsibility when navigating such deep waters of human suffering, requiring a delicate balance between gripping narrative pacing and profound ethical reverence. When a host steps into the quiet space of a recording studio to recount these harrowing events, they are not merely presenting facts to an audience. They are acting as temporary custodians of memory, holding open a window into a past that demands to be remembered with absolute clarity and unwavering compassion. Every word chosen, every historical detail verified, and every moment of reflective pause contributes to an overarching dialogue about justice, safety, and human resilience. This medium allows us to honor the lost by keeping their names alive in the collective consciousness, transforming historical archives into living lessons that resonate across generations. It reminds listeners that behind every closed door, beneath every polite smile, and within every community, there exists a shared obligation to look out for one another, to question the comfortable illusions of safety, and to maintain an eternal vigilance against the shadows that threaten the vulnerable. As this extensive chronicle of the Houston mass murders reaches its final, contemplative conclusion, we find ourselves standing once again at the quiet intersection of memory, history, and profound human empathy. The 28 young men and boys who walked into the dark orbit of the Candyman remain our silent sentinels, standing watch across the decades as a poignant symbol of lost potential and a testament to the absolute necessity of institutional accountability, parental attentiveness, and moral courage. Their stories demand that we never again turn a blind eye to the vulnerable or dismiss the quiet cries of families searching for lost loved ones in the darkest hours of uncertainty. In remembering them, we honor their humanity, defy the silencing darkness of the past, and pledge ourselves to an unwavering commitment of protection, empathy, and truth, ensuring that their names are never forgotten and their stories continue to serve as a beacon calling us toward a safer, more compassionate world. The echoes of that fateful morning in August 1973 will forever reverberate through the annals of history, serving as an unyielding guardian of our collective conscience and a permanent beacon calling us toward a future where our streets are safe, our children are fiercely protected, and the dark predators who lurk in the margins can find no sanctuary anywhere within the civilized world we share. As we step across the final boundary of this exhaustive and deeply harrowing chronicle, we find ourselves lingering at the ultimate horizon where historical documentation dissolves into the quiet, everlasting domain of collective memory. The journey that commenced on the asphalt of the 1970s Houston Heights has forced us to navigate the most obscure and terrifying labyrinths of human behavior, charting the devastating convergence of predatory manipulation, societal isolation, and institutional failure. Yet, when every courtroom gavel has fallen silent, when the last physical vestiges of horror have been scrubbed clean or buried beneath modern concrete, we are left with a profound, resonant stillness that transcends historical recounting. This story, etched permanently into the foundational bedrock of American true crime, serves as an enduring testament to the fragile parameters of human safety and the sacred obligation of a civilized society to protect those who walk its margins in search of belonging. The shadow of Dean Corll, cast long and dark across the decades, remains an ominous reminder that the gravest dangers do not always arrive cloaked in distant wilderness, but can wear the warm, welcoming smile of a trusted neighbor, offering sweetness and sanctuary while concealing an abyss of absolute malice. The enduring significance of the Houston mass murders lies not merely in the numerical scale of the tragedy or the grotesque mechanics of torture, but in the profound moral awakening it forced upon a nation long prone to look away from the darker realities of adolescent vulnerability. Before the events of August 1973 shattered the comforting illusions of the Heights, the public consciousness was largely sheltered from the grim mechanics of organized domestic predation. The case obliterated the naive assumption that serial violence was an exotic anomaly restricted to societal fringes, demonstrating with brutal finality that malignant actors could seamlessly integrate themselves into the daily civic rhythm, exploiting the simple, innocent human desire for connection and temporary escape from economic hardship. By weaponizing generosity and manufacturing false security, the perpetrator exposed the dangerous vulnerabilities inherent in systems relying on blind trust and passive acceptance. The societal shockwave generated by the unearthing of mass graves catalyzed a long-overdue revolution in how communities perceive, evaluate, and protect their youth, transforming tragic ignorance into an era characterized by heightened vigilance, psychological awareness, and rigorous institutional accountability. Central to the emotional and ethical weight of this extensive chronicle is the unyielding imperative to honor the 28 young men and boys whose lives were so unjustly and violently intercepted before they could fully realize their potential in this world. In the sensationalized landscape of true crime media, there is a constant danger of reducing human beings to mere statistics, forensic markers, or dramatic plot devices in a macabre narrative. We must resolutely reject this reductionism by remembering that every single victim was a living, breathing soul with a unique constellation of hopes, fears, family bonds, and dreams extending far beyond their tragic final chapters. They were sons who brought warmth to modest homes, brothers who shared quiet moments of laughter, and friends whose sudden, unexplained disappearances left irreparable, bleeding voids in the hearts of those who loved them. The grief carried by their families was not neatly packaged or resolved by the passage of time or the delivery of judicial verdicts. It became an eternal endurance, a silent, daily monument to an absence that could never be filled. By keeping their memories alive with dignity, empathy, and uncompromising respect, we ensure that their stories serve as an eternal guardian against indifference. The complex, deeply troubled trajectories of the secondary figures caught within this web of horror, specifically David Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley, offer a sobering, harrowing exploration of the moral ambiguities that emerge when vulnerable youths are exposed to systemic psychological coercion. Neither teenager began their existence as a willing agent of destruction. Rather, they were systematically targeted, compromised, and trapped in an inescapable matrix of fear, financial dependency, and shared guilt by a master manipulator who understood precisely how to exploit the insecurities of developing minds. While Henley's desperate, courageous act of survival on that August morning broke the cyclical nightmare and saved innocent lives, it could not erase the dark reality of his prior complicity in entrapping his peers. Their decades of confinement within the austere, rigid walls of the Texas correctional system stand as grim monuments to the devastating consequences of moral collapse under extreme duress, challenging the judicial framework to balance individual accountability against the profound impacts of predatory grooming. Their long incarcerations eventually brought a quiet close to the active human actors of this tragedy, leaving behind a legacy illustrating how swiftly innocence can be twisted into devastation when evil operates unchecked within an isolated community. As the decades march onward with relentless velocity, the physical geography of the crimes undergoes an inevitable, ceaseless process of erasure and renewal, mirroring humanity's deep-seated desire to bury trauma and allow scarred landscapes to heal completely. The modest houses, the quiet residential lanes, and the grim warehouses that once whispered secrets of unimaginable horror have long since been demolished, scrubbed clean, or completely redeveloped, absorbed entirely into the dynamic, sprawling architecture of a rapidly modernizing Texan metropolis. Urban planners and local authorities sought to distance the community from its blood-soaked past, hoping that physical transformation would extinguish the phantom echoes of the past. Yet history repeatedly demonstrates that while buildings can be torn down and land can be repurposed, intangible cultural memories and collective scars stubbornly endure. The legend of the Candyman transcended its local origins to become a permanent, cautionary fixture in American folklore, passed down through generations as a dark reminder of the hidden dangers lurking behind ordinary facades. This geographical erasure, coupled with cultural permanence, underscores the reality that dark historical events leave behind an indelible phantom footprint, a silent testament to human memory, which invariably outlives physical structures attempting to contain it. The evolution of investigative standards and law enforcement protocols in the wake of the Houston mass murders represents one of the most vital institutional transformations in modern criminal justice history. The catastrophic failure of police agencies in the early 1970s to investigate missing youth reports with urgency, reflexively dismissing them as voluntary runaways, exposed a fatal administrative blindness that actively shielded predators from detection. The unearthing of the mass graves shattered this complacency, forcing a comprehensive modernization of missing persons databases, interagency communication channels, and specialized child protection frameworks across the United States. Law enforcement leaders were forced to confront the uncomfortable truth that every unexplained disappearance demanded immediate, aggressive scrutiny rather than passive bureaucratic neglect. This hard-won institutional awakening ensured that future generations of vulnerable adolescents would benefit from a vastly superior protective apparatus, turning the profound grief of families into a powerful catalyst for systemic reform. The legacy of these improvements stands as a permanent shield, ensuring that the tragic lessons forged in the crucible of 1970s Houston continue to protect countless young lives from falling through the cracks of an indifferent system. Engaging with true crime narratives of this staggering magnitude carries a profound ethical responsibility, demanding an unwavering balance between historical inquiry and deep moral reflection to ensure the exploration never slips into mere sensationalism. When approached with genuine empathy and analytical rigor, the study of such atrocities acts as an essential mirror reflecting both the darkest abysses of human depravity and the remarkable resilience of communities striving to learn from their collective failures. It reminds us that civilization is built upon a delicate social contract of mutual trust, a contract that is uniquely vulnerable to individuals who choose to exploit the good faith of others for malicious ends. The Houston mass murders challenge us to confront uncomfortable truths about economic vulnerability, adolescent isolation, and the hidden struggles of youth who feel invisible in their own neighborhoods. By maintaining an unflinching focus on the humanity of the victims and the systemic lessons of the investigation, storytelling transforms from a recounting of horror into an act of remembrance and a call to moral vigilance, ensuring that the past is neither exploited for entertainment nor forgotten in the rush of time. In the final analysis, the shadow cast by the Houston mass murders and the grim moniker of the Candyman serves as an eternal sentinel guarding against complacency. The 28 young men and boys vanishing into that dark orbit remain silent guides, urging us never to turn a blind eye to the vulnerable or dismiss quiet cries of families searching for lost loved ones. Safety is never absolute, and community preservation requires active, unyielding commitment to empathy, institutional accountability, and moral courage. As echoes recede into history, lessons forged in the crucible stand as a beacon calling toward a future where streets are safe, children are protected, and dark predators find no sanctuary within our shared civilized world. Enduring vigilance remains our solemn obligation. Let us ensure their sacrifice is never forgotten, institutions remain accountable, and shadows of indifference are forever illuminated by the enduring light of justice, truth, and profound human compassion.